Imagine a quiet English village, St. Mary Mead, where the ancient St. Albans Church hides a chilling secret. A man lies dead in a pew, surrounded by stolen jewels that glitter with betrayal. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp mind and gentle smile, unravels a web of greed and vengeance. From a London jazz club's smoky shadows to a vicar's guilty confession, she follows clues lavender-scented letters, grey fibers, a black glove to expose a cunning mastermind. In just 30 seconds, step into a world where sanctuary turns to danger and truth waits in the heart of a church. Chapter 1. The Shadow in the Navda village of St. Mary. Mead lay cloaked in the chill mist of a November morning in 1952. Its cobblestoned lanes and thatched roofs softened by the grey haze that drifted from the meadows. The air was sharp with the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke, and the world seemed hushed, as if holding its breath. At the heart of the village stood St. Albans Church, a venerable structure of weathered stone, its Norman tower rising sternly against the fog, its leaded windows glinting faintly with the promise of dawn. It was a place of quiet reverence, where generations had knelt in prayer, confessed their sins, and sought solace. Yet, on this particular Tuesday, the church harboured a scene that would shatter its sanctity. Reverend Clement Dane, a man of gentle disposition and scholarly habits, was crossing the nave at 7:30, his footsteps echoing softly on the flagstones. He carried a small stack of hymnals, his mind occupied with the morning's service and the sermon he had yet to polish. The church was cold, the air heavy with the musty scent of old wood and wax. As he approached the chancel, his eyes caught a shadow in the third pew from the altar, a shape that did not belong. He paused, his heart giving a curious lurch, and adjusted his spectacles. There, slumped against the polished oak, was a man. His head rested at an unnatural angle, his face pale as the marble effigies in the churchyard. His eyes, wide and unseeing, stared toward the vaulted ceiling, where a shaft of light from a stained-glass window painted his features in hues of crimson and gold. A thin line of blood, dark and viscous, had trickled from his temple, pooling on the pew and dripping silently onto the stone floor. Reverend Dane's breath caught, the hymnals slipping from his hands with a soft thud. "Good heavens," he whispered, his voice trembling in the vast silence. He stepped closer, though every instinct urged him to flee. The man was unmistakably dead, his hands limp at his sides, one clutching a crumpled handkerchief. Beside him, half concealed beneath the pew, lay a velvet pouch, its drawstring loosened. From it spilled a scattering of jewels, rubies that glowed like drops of blood, emeralds with a cold green fire, and diamonds that sparkled wickedly in the dim light. They seemed to mock the sanctity of the place, their beauty at odds with the grim tableau. Reverend Dane, his knees weak, backed away and hurried to the vestry, where he telephoned Dr. Haydock, the village physician, and then the police. Within the hour, St. Mary Mead was stirred from its slumber. Constable Hurst arrived first, his ruddy face paling as he surveyed the scene. By 9 o'clock, Inspector Dermot Craddock of Scotland Yard, summoned from a nearby case in Much Benham, had taken charge. His men cordoned off the church, their voices low and efficient as they photographed the body and bagged the jewels. The villagers, drawn by whispers of tragedy, gathered at the lich gate, their murmurs rising like a tide. The dead man, Craddock learned, was Victor Lane, a Londoner of some 40 years, known in certain circles as a dealer in antiquities and rare artifacts. His wallet, found in his overcoat, contained a business card for a shop in Bond Street, and a train ticket from Paddington to St. Mary Mead, dated the previous evening. The jewels, according to early inquiries, matched the description of a collection stolen from Lady Beatrice Harrow's Mayfair residence 3 months prior a theft that had baffled the Metropolitan Police and filled the society pages with speculation. But what had brought Lane, a man with no known ties to the village, to this remote church? And why had death found him here, in a place meant for sanctuary? At Danemead Cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting a soft rhythm in her lap. The morning's news had reached her through Cherry, her young maid, who burst into the drawing-room with wide eyes and a breathless account. "It's dreadful, Miss Marple. A man dead in St. Albans, and jewels all over the place. They say he was murdered, stabbed, or some such. Mrs. Price at the post office heard it from the milkman, who saw the police vans." Miss Marple. Hands paused, her mild blue eyes sharpening behind her spectacles. "Murdered, you say?" she murmured, her voice deceptively soft. "In the church? How very bold." She set her knitting aside and leaned forward, her mind already sifting through the fragments of Cherry's tale. "Tell me, Cherry, what do they say about this man? Was he known here?" Cherry shook her head, settling onto a chair with the eagerness of one bearing rare gossip. "Not a soul knew him, Miss. Londoner, they say, with a fancy coat and a face like he'd seen trouble. The jewels, oh, they're saying they're worth thousands. Stolen, most like. But why'd he come here, of all places?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, though her expression remained thoughtful. "Why, indeed," she said. "A church is a curious place for such a man to meet his end. It suggests intention. A meeting, perhaps, or a betrayal." She rose, smoothing her skirt, and reached for her shawl. "I think, Cherry, I shall take a walk to the vicarage. Reverend Dane will be much distressed, and I should like to hear his account." As she stepped into the misty lane, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the nature of sanctuaries. A church was a place where one laid bare one's soul, where secrets were whispered in the shadow of the confessional. But secrets, she knew, had a way of escaping their bounds, and some carried a price paid in blood. The jewels, the stranger, the sacred ground profaned. She felt the stirrings of a pattern, faint but insistent, like the first threads of a tapestry. St. Mary Mead, for all its sleepy charm, had become the stage for a drama of greed and guile, and Miss Marple, with her quiet step and keen eye, was determined to unravel it. Chapter 2. The vicar's tale. The mist that had cloaked St. Mary Mead at dawn lingered into the afternoon, weaving a delicate shroud over the village's lanes and gardens. The air was sharp with the bite of late autumn, and the elms along the high street stood stark, their leaves carpeting the ground in russet and gold. St. Albans Church, its grey stone walls now a silent witness to the morning's grim discovery, loomed at the village's heart, its spire piercing the haze like a sentinel. The police had retreated to their vans, leaving only a solitary constable at the lych gate, but the murmur of scandal rippled through the village. From the post office to the Blue Boar Inn, a man murdered in a church, jewels glittering beside. His corpse was a tale to stir even the drowsiest of hamlets. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a woolen shawl and armed with her stout umbrella, made her way along the cobbled path to the vicarage. Her step was measured, her mild blue eyes taking in the familiar sights. The butcher's boy whistling as he pedalled past, the curtains twitching at Mrs. Price's window, the faint clatter of teacups from the Women's Institute Hall. To an outsider, St. Mary Mead was a picture of pastoral serenity, But Miss Marple knew better. Beneath its tranquil surface lay currents of human nature, envy, ambition, fear as potent here as in any bustling city. The murder of Victor Lane, she suspected, had stirred those currents, and she meant to trace their course. A rambling Georgian house with ivy-clad walls stood adjacent to St. Albans. Its garden a tidy patchwork of late roses and clipped yews. Miss Marple knocked softly, and the door was opened by Griselda Dane, the vicar's young wife, whose bright eyes and quick smile belied the strain of the day. "Oh, Jane, do come in," she exclaimed, ushering her into the hall. In an absolute state, as you can imagine. Clement's been pacing like a caged lion, and I've burned the scones twice. Tea. Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression sympathetic but alert. "Tea would be lovely, my dear. I thought I might look in after this morning's unpleasantness. How is the Reverend?" Griselda led her to the drawing-room, a cosy space with chintz curtains and a fire crackling in the grate. Reverend Clement. Dane stood by the window, his tall, stooped figure silhouetted against the misty garden. His face, usually serene, was etched with worry, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. At Miss Marple's entrance, he turned, managing a wan smile. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to come. I fear we're poor company today." "Nonsense, Clement," Miss Marple said, settling into an armchair as Griselda poured tea from a silver pot. "It's only natural to be shaken. A dreadful thing to find such a scene in your church. I thought you might tell me what happened, every detail, if you please. Sometimes the smallest things matter." The vicar sank into a chair, rubbing his forehead. "I scarcely know where to begin. It was just past 7 when I entered the church. I'd been in my study, working on my sermons, something about forgiveness, though it feels hollow now. The church was locked last night after evensong, as always. I unlocked the main door myself this morning, using the key from the vestry safe. I was crossing the nave, carrying some hymnals, when I saw him." He paused, his voice faltering. Griselda, perched on the sofa, leaned forward, her hands twisting a handkerchief. "Go on, Clement. Tell her exactly." The vicar nodded, his eyes distant. He was in the third pew from the chancel, slumped as if asleep, but wrong somehow. His head was tilted, and there was blood on the pew, the floor. I knew at once he was dead. Then I saw the pouch under the pew, the jewels. They caught the light, like something from a dream. Rubies, emeralds, diamonds. I didn't touch them, of course. I ran to the vestry, called Dr. Haydock, then the police. That's all, Miss Marple. I wish I could tell you more." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her gaze steady but kind. "You've told me a great deal, Reverend. The church was locked, you say, from evensong until morning. What time was evensong?" 6 o'clock, he replied. "It ended by past. I locked the doors, my self-main door, vestry, and the side entrance by the organ. No one could have entered without a key, unless—" He hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Unless," Miss Marple prompted, her voice gentle but insistent. "Unless someone had a duplicate." Griselda interjected, her tone sharp with unease. "But who would? The keys are kept in the safe, and only Clement has the combination. It's unthinkable." Miss Marple's lips twitched, though her expression remained serene. "Unthinkable things, my dear, have a way of happening. Tell me, Reverend, were there any visitors to the church yesterday? Anyone unusual?" The vicar frowned, his fingers drumming. On the armrest, The usual parishioners were at evensong: Mrs. Price, Miss Hartnell, old Mr. Jessup, but there was a man earlier in the day. I'd forgotten until now. He came in the afternoon, around 3. A tall fellow, dark coat, hat pulled low. He said he was passing through, interested in church architecture. Asked about the Norman arches, the history of the chancel. I gave him a brief tour, as I often do for visitors. Did he give a name? Miss Marple asked, her knitting needles clicking softly as she reached for her bag. No, and I didn't press. He seemed polite but reserved, kept glancing about as if looking for something. He lingered by the alms box, asked if it was ever left unattended. I told him it was checked daily, locked tight. He left soon after, but I remember thinking. He seemed watchful. Griselda's eyes widened, watchful. Clement, you didn't mention this. Do you think he was involved? I don't know, the vicar said, his voice heavy. I've been asking myself that all day. If I'd been more suspicious, perhaps, but he was just a stranger, and St. Albans is open to all. Miss Marple set her teacup down, her mind turning like a well-oiled machine. A stranger in a dark coat, asking odd questions, lingering by the alms box. The church locked, yet a body and jewels found within. The pieces were scattered, but she sensed a design beneath the chaos. Did this man have any distinguishing features? She asked. An accent, perhaps, or a mannerism. The vicar shook his head. None that I recall. His voice was ordinary, English. He wore gloves, I think black leather. I noticed because he didn't remove them, even indoors. But that's all. Griselda, unable to contain herself, leaned forward. Jane, those jewels. They're saying they're stolen, from some grand lady in London. Do you think this Lane was a thief, hiding from his gang, or was he meeting someone here, someone who did him in? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her tone remained grave. Both are possible, my dear. A thief might seek a quiet place to lie low, but a church is an odd choice to public, to sacred. No, I think Mr. Lane came here for a purpose. A meeting, as you say, or perhaps to deliver something. The jewels suggest a transaction, but the murder that speaks of betrayal or fear. Someone wanted him silenced. The vicar shifted uncomfortably. Silenced in St. Albans. It's monstrous. The church is a sanctuary, a place of peace. To think it was used for such a deed. He trailed off, his hands trembling. Miss Marple's gaze softened. It is monstrous, Reverend, but human nature is often so. A sanctuary draws all sorts, those seeking redemption, and those fleeing justice. Mr. Lane, I suspect, was the latter. But tell me, were there any other incidents recently? Anything out of the ordinary, however small? Griselda glanced at her husband, then spoke. Well, there was the alms box last week. Clement found it ajar, though nothing was taken. We thought it was just carelessness, someone forgetting to lock it after a service. But now, with this man asking about it, the vicar nodded. I checked the box after evensong last Tuesday. The lock was loose, as if tampered with, but the coins were all there. I tightened it and thought no more of it. Could it be connected? Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing on the detail. An alms box, tampered with, but not robbed. A stranger inquiring about its security. A locked church, yet a murder within. The threads were faint, but they were beginning to weave. Together, it may mean nothing, she said, or it may mean everything. One must consider all possibilities. She rose, smoothing her skirt. "Thank you both of you for your candor. I shall call again, if I may. In the meantime, Reverend, try not to dwell too heavily. The truth has a way of coming to light, however dark the shadows." Griselda walked her to the door, her voice low. "Jane, do you really think you can sort this out? The police are all over it, but you see things they don't." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "I see only what is there, my dear, people and the patterns they make. But patterns, once seen, can lead one to the truth." She stepped into the misty garden, pausing by the churchyard gate. The ancient yews stood sentinel, their branches heavy with the weight of centuries. Beyond them, St. Albans loomed, its windows dark now, its secrets locked within. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the vestry door, half hidden by a climbing rose, a locked church, a tampered alms box, a stranger in a dark coat, and Victor Lane, dead, with stolen jewels at his side. The why of it eluded her, but the how was taking shape as she walked home, the village settling into the quiet of late afternoon. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the nature of trust. Reverend Dane was a good man, but goodness could blind one to guile. The stranger had exploited that, she suspected, probing the church's defences, but for what? To hide the jewels, or to ensure a murder could be done unseen? And Lane had he come willingly, or was he lured to his death? Back at Danemead Cottage, Cherry greeted her with a fresh pot of tea and more gossip from the village. "They're saying he was stabbed, Miss Marple, with something sharp and thin. And the jewels, Mrs. Price says they're from a robbery in London, a proper to-do. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resumed. "I make of it, Cherry, that someone planned this very carefully. A church is a bold choice for a crime, but a clever one. It draws the eye, distracts from the hand that strikes. But hands leave traces, and traces lead to names." She thought of the vicar's tale, the stranger's gloves, the alms box's loose lock. Small things, but in St. Mary Mead, small things often held great weight. The village, she knew, would yield its secrets in time, not through force, but through the quiet observation of an old lady who understood the ways of the heart. As the fire crackled and the mist thickened outside, Miss Marple's needles clicked on, stitching together the first threads of a truth that lay hidden in the shadows of St. Albans. Chapter 3. The heiresses lost the November dusk, settled over St. Mary Mead with a quiet insistence, the mist of morning giving way to a creeping chill that seeped through the village's lanes. Lamps glowed softly in cottage windows, casting pools of light on the cobbles, and the air carried the faint tang of coal fires. St. Albans Church stood silent, its doors barred by police tape, a stark reminder of the violence that had breached its sanctity. The village, though outwardly calm, thrummed with speculation, each whispered theory adding to the tapestry of intrigue that now enveloped the murder of Victor Lane. Miss Jane Marple sat in her drawing-room at Danemead Cottage, the fire casting a warm flicker across the walls. Her knitting lay idle in her lap, a half-finished scarf trailing pale wool as she awaited the arrival of Inspector Dermot Craddock. The young Scotland Yard man had telephoned earlier, requesting a visit, and Miss Marple, ever attuned to the nuances of such calls, sensed he was grappling with a puzzle that defied his usual methods. She had known Craddock for some years, a sharp mind tempered by a willingness to listen, and she suspected he valued her insights more than he cared to admit. The clock on the mantel chimed 5:30 when a knock sounded at the door. Cherry, bustling in with a tray of tea and biscuits, admitted the inspector, who entered with a brisk nod and a faint smile. "Miss Marple, thank you for seeing me," he said, settling into the armchair she indicated. His dark suit was slightly rumpled, his eyes shadowed with the fatigue of a long day. "I'm afraid St. Mary Mead's given us a proper headache this time." Miss Marple poured tea, her movements precise. "Murder is always a headache, Inspector, particularly in a place like this. But I find headaches often yield to a clear mind and a bit of patience. What have you learned about our unfortunate Mr. Lane?" Craddock opened his notebook, its pages crowded with neat script. "Quite a bit, though it raises more questions than answers. Victor Lane, 42, London-based. Dealer in antiquities, legitimate on paper, but his reputation's murky. He's been linked to several shady transactions, mostly art and jewellery, though nothing proven. His shop in Bond Street's a front, we think, for fencing stolen goods. The jewels found with him 23 pieces, including a ruby necklace, and a diamond tiara belonged to Lady Beatrice Harrow. They were stolen from her Mayfair townhouse on August 12th. A clean job, no arrests. She's offering a hefty reward for their return." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. "Lady Beatrice Harrow," she murmured. "A formidable woman, if memory serves. I recall reading of her in the papers, a widow, fiercely protective of her collection. The theft must have been a blow. But why St. Mary Mead, Inspector? What brought Mr. Lane here with such a prize?" Craddock sighed, rubbing his jaw. "That's the crux of it. Lane had no known connections, here no family, no clients. His train ticket shows he left Paddington at 6 yesterday evening, arriving at St. Mary Mead by 8. We're checking local taxis and inns, but so far no one saw him until the vicar found him dead. The wound single, clean, through the temple suggests a stiletto or similar blade. Precise, professional, not a crime of passion, but calculation." Miss Marple set her teacup down, her mind turning. "Calculation," she echoed. "A stiletto is a deliberate choice, Inspector. It requires skill, nerve, and the church. It's an audacious setting, don't you think? A place of refuge turned into a trap. Have you considered why the jewels were left beside him? A thief might have taken them, unless they were meant to be found," Craddock finished, nodding. "I've thought the same. It's as if the killer wanted us to know Lane's purpose here. A message, perhaps, or a distraction. But there's more fibres on Lane's coat. Grey wool, not from his own clothing. They suggest he brushed against someone, likely just before he died. We're analysing them, but they're common enough. Could be from a coat, a scarf." Miss Marple's lips twitched, her thoughts darting to the vicar's tale of the stranger in the dark coat. "Grey wool," she said softly. "How curious. One wonders where such a thread might lead. And Mr. Lane's associates, a man in his trade, must have known dangerous people." Craddock flipped a page in his notebook. "We're digging into that. Lane was a regular at the Blue Orchid, a Soho club known for its eclectic clientele. Smugglers, fencers, the odd gangster. He was seen there last week, talking with a man called Reggie Voss, a known fence with a rap sheet, petty theft, handling stolen goods. Voss hasn't been seen since, which is suspicious. There's also talk of a woman, a singer at the club. Lily Dane, she was close to Lane, but she's dropped out of sight too." Miss Marple's needles resumed their quiet rhythm, though her attention was fixed on Craddock. "Lily Dane," she said, her voice thoughtful. "An interesting name, and perhaps a coincidence. given the vicar's surname. And this Mr. Foster's. He favoured greycoats, I wonder. Or perhaps someone else Lane met here, in St. Mary Mead. The fibres suggest proximity, after all. Craddock's eyes narrowed, a spark of interest kindling. You're thinking local. It's possible, though the village seems an unlikely spot for a professional hit. Still, we're checking everyone who was near the church yesterday. The vicar mentioned a stranger, tall, dark coat, asking about the church's history. We're trying to trace him, but he left no name, no trace. Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving threads of its own. The stranger, the fibres, the locked church. The pattern was elusive, but she felt its shape forming, like a melody half remembered. A stranger who asks questions and vanishes, she said. It's a familiar story, Inspector. But let us consider Lady Beatrice Harrow. Has she been questioned? Her jewels are at the heart of this, and where there's wealth, there's motive. Craddock leaned back, his tea cooling untouched. She's been cooperative, in her way. I spoke to her this morning, by telephone. She's in London, furious about the theft, but relieved the jewels are recovered. She claims no knowledge of Lane, though she's eager to see the thief. Or thieves' court. She mentioned a cousin, a distant relation who fell out with the family years ago. A woman, Lillian something. We're looking into it, but it's a long shot. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze sharpening. Lillian, she said. Another thread, perhaps. Families, Inspector, are such fertile ground for secrets. A falling out, a grudge confessor, turn to something darker. I should like to know more about this cousin. Craddock jotted a note, his expression rueful. You've a knack for spotting what I miss, Miss Marple. I'll have my men dig deeper into the Harrow family, but I confess I'm stumped by the church. Why kill Lane there, if it was a gang? Settling scores, a back alley in London would have been simpler. And if it was about the jewels, why not take them? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her tone was grave. Simplicity, Inspector, is not always the goal. A church is a stage, a place that draws the eye. To kill there is to make a statement, perhaps to warn others, or to mock the very idea of sanctuary. As for the jewels, they may have been left to point us toward a truth, or away from it. Have you searched the church thoroughly? Craddock nodded, top to bottom. Nothing out of place, save the body and the pouch. The vestry lock showed. No signs of tampering, nor did the main doors. The vicar's certain they were secure, and we found no spare keys. It's as if Lane and his killer walked through walls. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. Walls, Inspector, are less solid than they seem when one knows the way. A church has many corners, many shadows. I wonder, did anyone see Lane arrive in the village? A man with such a burden must have been cautious, yet he was found exposed. Craddock flipped through his notes. We're still asking. The station master recalls a man matching Lane's description getting off the 8 o'clock train, alone, carrying a small case. He walked toward the village, but no one saw where he went. The Blue Boar's landlord says no strangers checked. In last night, and the taxi driver was off duty. It's like he vanished until morning. Miss Marple's mind turned to the vicarage, to Reverend Dane's anxious recounting of the stranger who lingered by the alms box. A man in a dark coat, gloved, watchful. Had he been Lane's killer, or merely a scout? And the grey fibres, could they belong to him, or to someone closer? Someone who moved unnoticed in St. Mary Mead's quiet rhythms. She thought of Griselda's quick tongue, the vicar's troubled eyes, the village's knack for hiding its truths in plain sight. "Inspector," she said, "I suggest you look closely at the Blue Orchid. A club like that is a crossroads for secrets. Mr. Voss, Miss Dane, they may hold the key to Lane's last days, and the grey fibres. They may lead you to someone who was in the church, or near it, when Lane died. A coat, a scarf, even a blanket, such things tell stories." Craddock closed his notebook, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You make it sound simple, Miss Marple. I'll follow your leads, and I'll let you know what we find. But I warn you, this case feels like chasing shadows." Miss Marple's smile was serene, though her eyes were sharp. "Shadows, Inspector, are cast by something solid. Find the source, and the shadows will fall away." Craddock took his leave, promising to return with any developments. As the door closed behind him, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the soft click of her needles, a counterpoint to the crackle of the fire. Cherry, clearing the tea tray, hovered expectantly. "Well, miss, what did he say? Is it a gang, do you think, like in the films?" Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window, where the village lay shrouded in twilight. "A gang, Cherry, is possible, but gangs have leaders, and leaders have motives. Mr. Lane was a link in a chain. I think a chain that stretches from London to St. Mary Mead, from wealth to betrayal. The church was chosen for a reason, and that reason lies in human nature. Greed, fear, revenge. They leave traces as surely as those grey fibres." She thought of Lady Beatrice Harrow, her stolen jewels, her estranged cousin, of Reggie Voss, fleeing the Blue Orchid's smoky haze, of Lily Dane, whose name echoed the vicar's, perhaps by chance, perhaps by design, and of the stranger in the dark coat, whose questions about the alms box hinted at a plan set in motion before Lane's death. The village, she knew, held its own secret small jealousies, hidden debts, old grudges. Somewhere in the interplay of these threads lay the truth. As Cherry bustled off to the kitchen, Miss Marple rose and crossed to her writing desk. She took a sheet of paper and began a list, her spidery handwriting cataloguing the facts. Lane, jewels, church, fibres, Voss, Dane, Harrow. Beside each, she jotted questions. Why St. Mary Mead? Who knew the church's habits? What frightened Lane? The list grew, a map of possibilities, and she studied it with the quiet intensity of one who saw not just the pieces, but the spaces between them. Outside, the village settled into night, its lamps dimming as the mist thickened. St. Albans stood silent, its secrets locked within its ancient walls. But Miss Marple, with her clear eyes and patient heart, knew that secrets, like shadows, could not hide forever. The truth, she felt, was close hidden in a glance, a word, a thread of grey wool. And she would find it, as she always did, by listening to the pulse of human nature, which beat as strongly in St. Mary Mead as in the darkest corners of the world. Chapter 4. The man in the dark coat. The November night draped St. Mary Mead in a velvet chill, the stars obscured by a low ceiling of cloud that pressed upon the village like a lid. The lamps along the high street burned dimly, their light swallowed by the damp air, and the silence was broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl from the meadows beyond St. Albans Church. Its silhouette, softened by the darkness, stood as a sombre sentinel, its doors still sealed by the police, its sanctity marred by the memory of Victor Lane's lifeless form. The village, though outwardly at rest, buzzed with an undercurrent of unease. as if the murder had stirred something primal in its quiet heart. Miss Jane Marple sat by her fire at Danemead Cottage, a shawl about her shoulders, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, soothing rhythm. The room was warm, the glow of the flames dancing across the chintz curtains and the polished surfaces of her modest furniture. Yet her mind was far from the cosy confines of her drawing room, weaving through the fragments of the case that had consumed St. Mary Mead, Victor Lane, the stolen jewels, the church's locked doors, the grey wool fibres. They formed a puzzle that tantalized her, each piece hinting at a larger design. She had spent the day listening, as she always did, to the villagers' pulse, the chatter at the post office, the whispers at the butcher's, the nervous glances of neighbours who now saw shadows in every stranger. The morning had brought a fresh wave of gossip, fanned by the indefatigable Mrs. Price, the postmistress, whose knack for gleaning tidbits rivaled Miss Marple's own. Over a cup of tea at the Women's Institute, Mrs. Price had leaned close, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. "You'll never guess, Miss Marple, but there was a man at the Blue Boar Inn, Sunday night it was. A tall fellow, dark coat, paid in cash and gone before breakfast. Asked Mr. Giles, the landlord, about St. Albans, wanted to know when it was empty, if you please. Shifty, that's what I call it." Miss Marple had nodded, her expression mild but her mind alight. A man in a dark coat, echoing the vicar's account of the stranger who lingered by the alms box. The coincidence was too neat to ignore, and she had filed it away, another thread in the tapestry she was patiently stitching. Now, as the clock ticked toward 9, she awaited a visit from her friend Dolly Bantry, whose husband, Colonel Arthur Bantry, had connections that often proved useful in matters of intrigue. A knock at the door heralded Dolly's arrival, and Cherry ushered her in with a tray of cocoa and shortbread. Dolly, a plump, cheerful woman with a penchant for bright scarves, swept into the room, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of news. "Jane, my dear, you'll never believe what Arthur's heard," she exclaimed, settling onto the sofa. "I've been bursting to tell you all day, but he made me promise to wait until he'd spoken to his old army chum, Colonel Melchett. It's about the murder, of course, positively ghastly business." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her gaze attentive. "Do go on, Dolly. Colonel Melchett is a reliable source, and I'm eager to hear anything that sheds light on this affair." Dolly sipped her cocoa, savouring the moment. "Well, Arthur rang Melchett this afternoon, and it seems Scotland Yard's been keeping a close eye on a Ganga proper professional outfit. Jane, they've been hitting grand houses across the home counties. Always jewels, always clean as a whistle. No fingerprints, no witnesses, just gone like smoke. The Mayfair job lady, Beatrice Harrows, lot was one of theirs, Melchett says. They think it's led by someone awfully clever, someone who plans every move like a chess game. And here's the kicker. Victor Lane was known to them. Not the brains, mind you, but a go-between, someone who moved the goods. Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind racing. "A gang," she murmured, "and Mr. Lane, a link in their chain. That explains the jewels, perhaps, but not the church. Why bring such a haul to St. Mary Mead, only to die with it? And this leader, do they have a name?" Dolly shook her head, her scarf slipping slightly. "Not a whisper, Melchett says. They're slippery as eels. But he did mention something else. Lane was in trouble, or so the Yard thinks. He'd been acting jumpy, talking to the wrong people. They wonder if he crossed someone who didn't take kindly to it." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her thoughts darting to Inspector Craddock's mention of Reggie Voss and Lily Dane. A fence and a singer, both tied to Lane, both vanished. And now a gang with a shadowy mastermind. The pattern was growing clearer, though its edges remained blurred. Trouble, she said softly. Yes, that fits. A man like Lane, dealing in stolen goods, would have enemies, but to kill him in a church, that suggests more than a simple settling of scores. It's theatrical, Dolly, almost symbolic. Dolly shivered, though the room was warm. Symbolic. Oh, Jane, you give me the creeps. Do you think it was the gang, then, tidying up loose ends? Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her tone measured. Or perhaps Mr. Lane was a pawn, caught in a larger game. Tell me, did Colonel Melchett say anything about the Blue Orchid? Inspector Craddock mentioned it as a haunt of Lane's. Dolly's brow furrowed. Not specifically, but he did say the Yard's been watching Soho clubs for months. Places where deals are made in back rooms, you know. I expect the Blue Orchid's one of them. Arthur says it's all very sordid. Gambling, smuggling, worse. I can't imagine why anyone would go there. Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. People go where their desires lead. Dolly, however, sordid the path. And desires greed, ambition, fear often lead to betrayal. I think Mr. Lane went to St. Albans for a reason, and someone ensured he never left. Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping. Jane, you're onto something, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes. What's your theory? Miss Marple chuckled, deflecting with practiced ease. No theories yet, my dear, only questions. But questions, properly asked, have a way of finding answers. Now, tell me, has Arthur heard anything about strangers in the area? Mrs. Price mentioned a man at the Blue Boar, asking about the church. Dolly's eyes widened. Oh yes, I meant to tell you. Arthur was at the inn yesterday, having a pint with old Giles, and he heard about this chap. Sunday night, like Mrs. Price said, tall, dark coat, hat low over his face. Kept to himself, paid in cash, and asked odd questions when the church was empty, who had the keys. Giles thought he was a bit queer, but you know how travellers are. He was gone by Monday. Morning, no trace. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing on the detail. The stranger, again, his shadow lengthening across the case. The vicar's visitor, the inn's guest. Could they be one and the same? And if so, what was his purpose? To scout the church, to set a trap, or to ensure Lane's silence? She thought of the grey fibres Craddock had mentioned, the tampered alms box, the locked doors. The church, she felt, was the key, not just a stage, but a player in this drama. Dolly, she said, you've been most helpful. I think I shall take a walk to the Blue Boar tomorrow, to have a word with Mr. Giles. Landlords see more than they realize, and a casual chat often yields surprises. Dolly laughed, draining her cocoa. You're incorrigible, Jane. The police have their work cut out, with you poking about. But do be careful, this gang sounds nasty, and I'd hate for you to get mixed up in it. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. I'm only an old lady, Dolly, with a fondness for gossip. Hardly a threat to anyone. But I do like to understand things, and this affair is untidy. I shall tidy it in my way. Dolly took her leave, promising to relay any further tidbits from Colonel Bantry. As the door closed, Miss Marple rose and crossed to her writing desk, where her list from the previous evening lay waiting. She added new entries: gang leader, Blue Boar, stranger, alms box. Beside each, She jotted questions. Who planned the Mayfair theft? Why was Lane marked? What did the stranger seek? The list was a map of possibilities, and she studied it with the quiet intensity of one who saw not just the facts, but the human frailties behind them. The next morning dawned grey and raw, the clouds heavy with the promise of rain. Miss Marple, undeterred, donned her tweed coat and sturdy shoes and set out for the Blue Boar Inn. The village was stirring, its routines unbroken despite the shadow of murder. The milkman rattled along with his cart. Children scampered toward the schoolhouse, and Mrs. Price waved from the post office, her curiosity palpable. Miss Marple returned the wave, her expression benign, though her mind was anything but idle. The Blue Boar, a half-timber-bird building with a creaking sign, stood at the village's edge, its taproom a haven for locals and the occasional traveller. Mr. Giles, the landlord, was polishing glasses behind the bar when Miss Marple entered, her umbrella dripping from a brief drizzle. He greeted her with a nod, his ruddy face creasing in surprise. "Miss Marple, not often we see you here. What brings you out on such a morning?" "A small matter, Mr. Giles," she said, settling onto a stool with a disarming smile. "I heard you had a guest on Sunday night, a stranger who asked about St. Albans. I'm curious. You see, village history interests me, and he sounds like someone who might have had a story." Giles chuckled, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Curious, eh? Well, you're not wrong about him being odd. Tall chap, dark coat, hat pulled low, came in late Sunday, maybe 10 o'clock, ordered a whiskey, paid cash, and kept to a corner table. Didn't talk much, but he asked about the church, when it was open, when it was empty, who looked after it. I told him about Reverend Dane, services, that sort of thing. Thought he might be a historian, but he didn't seem the type." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice gentle. "Not the type." "How so?" Giles frowned, choosing his words. "Hard to say. He was polite mind, but sharp, like watched everything, everyone. Had gloves on, black ones, never took 'em off, and his eyes never still, always scanning. Left early Monday, before I was up. Paid for his room in advance, no fuss." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face betrayed nothing. Gloves, again, as the vicar had noted. A man who left no prints, no trace. Did he give a name, Mr. Giles, or mention where he was going? "No name," Giles said, shaking his head. "Signed the book as J. Smith, but that's as good as nothing. Didn't say where he was headed, just took his case and went. I'd have forgotten him, but with this murder, well, it makes you think." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. "It does, indeed. Thank you, Mr. Giles. You've been most helpful." She rose, leaving a shilling for a cup of tea she hadn't drunk, and stepped back into the drizzle, her thoughts a whirl of connections. The stranger, J. Smith, if that was his name, had been in St. Mary Mead the night before Lane's death, probing the church's habits. Had he been Lane's killer, or an accomplice, setting the stage? The gang, as Colonel Melchett described, was meticulous, professional. This man fit the mold, cautious, observant, invisible. But why the church? Why not a quiet lane, a hidden barn? The choice nagged at her, a deliberate act that spoke of purpose beyond mere convenience. Back at Danemead Cottage, Miss Marple found Cherry waiting with a fresh pot of tea and a gleam in her eye. "Miss Marple, you've been out sleuthing, haven't you? Mrs. Price says you were at the Blue Boar, asking about that stranger. What's he got to do with it?" Miss Marple smiled, settling by the fire. Perhaps nothing, Cherry, perhaps everything. People, you see, leave ripples, even when they try not to. This man left ripples, at the church, at the inn. I mean to find where they lead. She thought of the gang, its unseen leader, the jewels left as a taunt or a trap, of Reggie Voss, skulking in Soho's shadows, and Lily Dane, whose name hinted at secrets yet uncovered, and of the man in the dark coat, whose questions about St. Albans had set this tragedy in motion. The village, she knew, was a mirror, reflecting both its own truths and those brought from afar, somewhere in its quiet lanes or its sacred spaces lay the key to Victor Lane's death hand. Miss Marple, with her patient eye and unerring instinct, would find it. Chapter 5. The Blue Orchid. The November gloom clung to St. Mary Mead like a persistent guest, the days shortening as winter tightened its grip. By mid-morning, a thin rain had begun to fall, pattering against the windows of Danemead Cottage and turning the village lanes to slick, glistening ribbons. Inside, Miss Jane Marple sat at her writing desk, her knitting temporarily abandoned as she pored over her notes a neat array of names, places, and questions that grew with each passing hour. The murder of Victor Lane, with its tangle of stolen jewels, locked churches, and shadowy strangers, had stirred her curiosity to a fine pitch. She felt the case like a melody, its notes clear but its harmony elusive, and she was determined to resolve it. The village buzzed with fresh rumours, fueled by the police presence and the tantalizing details of the crime. At the post office, Mrs. Price whispered of London gangsters infiltrating the countryside. At the butcher's, old Mr. Jessup speculated that Lane had been a spy, his jewels a cover for darker dealings. Miss Marple listened to it all, sifting the chaff from the grain, her mild blue eyes missing nothing. The man in the dark coat, reported at both the church and the Blue Boar Inn, loomed large in her thoughts, as did the grey wool fibres found on Lane's body. But to trace these threads, she needed more than village gossips. She needed a window into Lane's world, a world of smoky clubs and whispered deals, far removed from St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes. To this end, she had enlisted her nephew, Raymond West, a writer with a flair for the dramatic and a knack for navigating London's less savoury corners. Raymond, ever indulgent of his aunt's little hobbies, had agreed to make inquiries at the Blue Orchid, the Soho club where Lane had been a regular. Miss Marple had written to him the previous evening, her letter precise yet discreet, urging him to seek out Reggie Voss, the fence, and Lily Dane, the singer, both of whom had vanished after Lane's death. Now, as the rain drummed softly, she awaited his reply, confident that Raymond's charm and persistence would yield something of value. The post arrived at 11. Cherry, her maid, brought in a thick envelope bearing Raymond's scrawling hand. "Here's your letter, Miss Marple," she said, her curiosity barely contained. "From London, by the look of it. Is it about the murder? Everyone's saying it's a proper mystery, like one of Mr. Raymond's books." Miss Marple smiled, slicing the envelope with a letter opener. "We shall see, Cherry. Mysteries, you know, are often less mysterious when one looks closely. Fetch me a fresh pot of tea, would you? I suspect I'll need it." As Cherry bustled off, Miss Marple settled into her armchair by the fire, unfolding Raymond's letter. His prose, as always, was florid, tinged with the self-conscious wit of a man who fancied himself a modern Oscar Wilde, but beneath the flourishes lay a wealth of detail. She adjusted her spectacles and began to read. "My dear Aunt Jane, You've set me a task worthy of a Conan Doyle hero, and I've done my best to rise to the occasion. The Blue Orchid, I must warn you, is no place for the faint-hearted, a den of vipers masquerading as a jazz club, all smoke and mirrors and dubious morals. I ventured there last night, armed with your instructions and a suitably vague cover story. I posed as a journalist researching Soho's nightlife, which raised no eyebrows. What I found may interest you, though it's a tangled web, and I fear I've only skimmed its surface. The Blue Orchid is a cavernous place, all red velvet and dim lights, with a stage where singers croon to a crowd of sharp-suited men and women who look like they've stepped from a gangster film. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the clink of glasses, and one feels watched, even when alone. I made inquiries, discreetly, about Victor Lane, Reggie Voss, and Lily Dane, and the responses were guarded, to say the least. Lane, it seems, was a known quantity, Hera, regular, always at a corner table, dealing in whispers. He was last seen a week ago, arguing with Voss in a back room. The barman, a surly chap with a scar on his cheek, clammed up when I pressed, but I gleaned that the argument was heated something about a job gone wrong and someone asking questions. Voss, I'm told, is a nasty piece of work offence, with a temper, known for moving stolen goods through the club's network. He's not been seen since Lane's last visit, which aligns with Inspector Craddock's information. The regulars are cagey about him, but I caught a hint from a waitress that he's gone to ground, possibly abroad. She mentioned Dover, though whether that's fact or rumour, I can't say. Voss, by the way, favours a grey overcoat, rather distinctive, with a velvet collar. I thought of your grey fibres when I heard that dot. As for Lily Dane, she's the club's star attraction, or was, until she vanished 3 days ago. A singer with a voice like honey and a reputation for keeping dangerous company. She was close to Lane, closer than mere friendship, if the gossip's true. The manager, a slick fellow named Carlo, claimed she was on holiday, but his eyes said otherwise. I managed to charm a stagehand into talking, and he let slip that Lily was seen leaving the club in a hurry the night before Lane's death, carrying a small case and looking scared witless. He overheard her mention St. Mary Mead, though he couldn't say why. Intriguing, no. I dug a bit deeper into Lily's background, as you asked. Her real name's Lillian Harrowis. Harrow, like the heiress whose jewels were stolen. A cousin, I gather, though long estranged. She fell out with the family years ago, something about a scandal, and took to the stage under a new name. The stagehand didn't know details, but he said Lily had a knack for getting what she wanted, and not always by honest means. Could she be tied to the theft or to Lane's murder? I leave that to your formidable brain. I'm off to chase a lead on Voster's talk. He's been spotted in Brighton, of all places. I'll write again when I have more. In the meantime, Aunt Jane, do take care. The Blue Orchid's a murky place, and I suspect its shadows reach further than we know. Yours, with a flair for the dramatic. Raymond. Miss Marple folded the letter, her mind alight with possibilities. The Blue Orchid, with its haze of smoke and secrets, was a crucible for the motives that had led to Lane's death. Reggie Voss, with his grey overcoat, was a prime candidate for the fibres on Lane's body, and his disappearance suggested guilt or fear. Lily Dane, or Lillian Harrow, was a more complex figure, her connection to Lady Beatrice Harrow a thread that could not be ignored, and the mention of St. Mary Mead, overheard in a moment of panic, was a clue that tied the club's intrigues to the village's sacred ground. She rose, crossing to her desk to update her list. New entries appeared in her spidery hand. Blue orchid, Voss, grey coat, Lily Dane, Lillian Harrow, St. Mary Mead mention. Beside each, she jotted questions. What was Lane's argument with Voss? Why did Lily flee? What scandal estranged Lillian Harrow? The list was a map of human frailties, greed, betrayal, ambition, and she studied it with the quiet intensity of one who saw not just the facts, but the hearts behind them. The rain had eased by noon, and Miss Marple, donning her tweed coat and a sensible hat, decided to call on Griselda Dane at the vicarage. The vicar's wife, with her quick wit and irreverent tongue, was a font of village lore, and Miss Marple hoped to glean more about the church's recent visitors. The vicarage garden was sodden, the roses drooping under the weight of rain, but Griselda welcomed her with a warm smile and a plate of slightly scorched scones. "Jane, you're a sight for sore eyes," Griselda said, ushering her into the drawing room. "Clement's been a misery since the murder, and I'm half mad with it all. Have you heard anything new? The village is positively crawling with theories." Miss Marple settled into a chintz-covered chair, accepting a cup of tea. "Theories abound, my dear, but facts are more elusive. I've been thinking about the church and the people who passed through it before Mr. Lane's death. Reverend Dane mentioned a stranger, tall, in a dark coat. Have you recalled anything else about him, or perhaps another visitor who seemed out of place?" Griselda's brow furrowed, her fingers twisting a stray curl. "Clement's told you about that man, has he? I didn't see him myself, but I do remember something odd, now you mention it. A woman came to the church last month, a tourist, she said. Fair hair, stylish coat, city type. Asked to see the brasses, said she was writing a book on village churches. I showed her round, but she seemed more interested in the vestry than the brasses. Asked about the locks, the keys, who came and went. I thought it was queer, but tourists can be eccentric, can't they?" Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. Queer, indeed. Did she give a name, or say where she was from? "She called herself Miss Lyle," Griselda said, "but I didn't catch her first name. Said she was staying in Much Benham at the Red Lion. I forgot about her until now, what with all this horror. Do you think she's important?" Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Everything is important, my dear, until it isn't. A woman interested in locks, that's worth noting. And no one else, no other strangers, or perhaps a parishioner acting." Oddly, Griselda hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice low. "Well, there's Mrs. Hartnell. She's been peculiar lately, more than usual. She's always in the church, polishing the pews or arranging flowers. But last week I caught her in the vestry, looking at the safe. She said she was checking the hymnals, but it didn't feel right. She's so nosy, Jane, but this was sneaky." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. Mrs. Hartnell, a pillar of the parish, was known for her sharp tongue and sharper curiosity, but sneaking suggested something more. "Thank you, Griselda," she said. "You've given me much to think about. I shan't keep you, but do let me know if anything else comes to mind." As she walked home through the damp lanes, Miss Marple's thoughts churned. The woman calling herself Miss Lyle was a new figure, her interest in the vestry locks a mirror to the stranger's questions about the alms box. Could she be Lily Dane, scouting the church under a false name? The timing fit last month, before the Mayfair theft, when plans might have been laid. And Mrs. Hartnell's behaviour, while possibly innocent, added a local thread to the web. The village, Miss Marple knew, was not merely a backdrop but a player in this drama, its habits and secrets woven into the crime. Back at Danemead Cottage, she found a second letter waiting. This one from Inspector Craddock, delivered by a constable. It was brief, confirming that the grey fibres matched a common wool blend sold in countless shops, but also noting a new find, a single glove, black leather, tucked behind a hymn book in the church's chancel. It bore no initials, no marks, but its presence was a jolt. The stranger, the vicar had said, wore black gloves. Miss Marple's mind raced. Had he dropped it in haste, or left it deliberately, a taunt to the police? She added the glove to her list, along with Miss Lyle and Mrs. Hartnell, and sat back, her eyes distant. The blue orchid had opened a door to Lane's world, revealing a cast of players Voss, Lily, the unseen gang leader whose motives intertwined with the church's sanctity. But St. Mary Mead held its own truths in the curiosity of a parishioner, the questions of a tourist, the shadow of a man in a dark coat. The murder, she felt, was a collision of worlds, urban and rural, sacred and profane, and its heart lay in the choices of those who crossed that divide. As the rain resumed, tapping a soft rhythm against the windows, Miss Marple took up her knitting. The click of her needles a counterpoint to her thoughts. Cherry, bringing in a late lunch, paused to watch her. "You're deep in it, aren't you, miss? Found the killer yet?" Miss Marple's smile was serene, though her eyes were sharp. "Not yet, Cherry, but I'm closer. People, you see, cannot help but reveal themselves. In a word, a glance, a glove, and when they do, the truth follows." She thought of Lily Dane, fleeing with a case and a secret, of Reggie Voss, his grey coat, a possible match for the fibres, of Miss Lyle, whose questions echoed the stranger's, and Mrs. Hot, whose sneaking hinted at hidden motives. The blue orchid was a stage, but St. Albans was the scene, and somewhere, in the interplay of these figures, lay the answer to Victor Lane's death. Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and unerring instinct, would find it, as she always did, by listening to the heartbeat of human nature, which pulsed as fiercely in a village church as in a Soho club. Chapter 6. The vestry doorth, the rain that had dampened St. Mary Mead through the week, had relented by Wednesday morning, leaving the village bathed in a pale watery sunlight that glinted off the wet cobbles and the slate roofs. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of turned leaves and the faint tang of wood smoke from early fires. St. Albans Church, its grey stone walls softened by the light, stood at the heart of the village, its spire a quiet sentinel against a sky streaked with thinning clouds. The police tape had been removed, but a constable lingered at the lych gate, a reminder of the violence that had shattered the church's peace. The murder of Victor Lane, with its glittering jewels and locked doors, had woven a spell over the village, and the whispers of intrigue grew louder with each passing day. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table in Danemead Cottage, sipped her tea and reviewed her notes, the spidery handwriting a map of the case's twisting paths. The blue orchid had revealed a world of shadows. Reggie Voss, the fence with his grey overcoat, Lily Dane or Lillian Harrow, the singer with a hidden past, and a gang led by an unseen mastermind whose reach extended from London's underworld to St. Mary Mead's sacred ground. The man in the dark coat glimpsed at the church, and the blue bore in loomed as a figure of menace, his black glove a tantalizing clue. Yet the village itself held secrets in the curiosity of Mrs. Hartnell, the questions of the mysterious Miss Lyle, and the tampered alms box that hinted at a breach in St. Albans' defences. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by Cherry, who bustled in with a fresh pot of tea and a gleam of excitement. "Miss Marple, you'll never guess what Tommy, the butcher's boy, told me at the shop this morning. He saw someone in the churchyard Monday night, before the murder. A figure, he said, slipping through the shadows by the vestry door. He's told the police, and they're all in a tizzy." Miss Marple's cup paused halfway to her lips, her eyes sharpening. "The vestry door, you say? How very interesting. Did Tommy describe this figure? And what time was it?" Cherry perched on a chair, eager to share. "He said it was dark, maybe 9 o'clock, and he was cutting through the churchyard on his way home. The figure was tall, moved quick, like they knew the path. He couldn't see a face, but he swears they went to the vestry door. He didn't think much of it then, but now, with Mr. Lane dead, well, it's spooky, isn't it?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The vestry door, tucked behind a screen of yews and roses, was a discreet entrance, rarely used except by the vicar and the verger. If someone had entered there Monday night, it suggested a plan away into the church that bypassed the locked main doors. She thought of the stranger in the dark coat, his questions about the alms box, and Miss Lyle, whose interest in the vestry locks now seemed less innocent. "Spooky, perhaps," she said, "but also illuminating. Thank you, Cherry. I think I shall call on Inspector Craddock this morning. Tommy's story may be a key we've overlooked." After breakfast, Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and a sturdy hat, her umbrella at the ready despite the clearing sky. The police had set up a temporary headquarters at the village hall, and she found Inspector Craddock there, hunched over a desk littered with reports. His face, usually composed, betrayed a flicker of frustration, but he brightened at her arrival. "Miss Marple, you're a welcome sight. This case is like trying to herd cats in a fog. Have you come with one of your insights?" Miss Mott settled into a chair, her expression mild but her gaze keen. "Perhaps, Inspector. I've heard about Tommy's sighting in the churchyard Monday night, the figure by the vestry door. It's a curious detail, don't you think? The vestry is out of sight, a perfect entry for someone who wished to go unnoticed. Have you examined the door itself?" Craddock's eyes narrowed, his interest piqued. "We have, as it happens, thanks to the boy's story. The lock shows signs of tampering, fine scratches, fresh, as if someone used a pick or a thin blade. No forced entry, mind you, but it suggests someone tried to get in, or did and covered their tracks. The main doors and the organ entrance were clean, so the vestry's our best bet for how Lane or his killer got inside." Miss Marple's lips twitched, her mind weaving connections. "Tampering," she murmured. "Like the alms box, a small breach but deliberate. And the timing, Monday night, hours before Lane's body was found. It suggests preparation, Inspector. Someone knew the church's habits, its quiet hours. Have you traced Tommy's figure? Any other witnesses?" Craddock shook his head, flipping. "Open his notebook. Not yet. The churchyard's secluded at night, and most folk are indoors by 9. We're asking around, but Tommy's the only one who's come forward. He's a reliable lad. Those sharp eyes, no reason to lie. We're also looking into Lane's movements. The station master confirmed he arrived at 8, but we've no sightings after that. It's as if he melted into the village." Miss Marple's fingers tapped lightly on her umbrella. "Melted or was hidden. A man carrying stolen jewels would be cautious, yet he was found in a pew, exposed. I wonder, did he enter the church to meet someone, or was he lured there? The vestry door suggests the latter a secret entry, a trap, and the jewels left beside him. They were meant to be seen, I think, to tell a story. Craddock leaned back, his expression thoughtful. A story? You mean a misdirection? I've wondered that myself. The jewels point to the Mayfair theft. 2 lanes, shady dealings. But they don't explain why here, why now. Your nephew's letter about the blue orchid was a help. Voss and Lily Dane are persons of interest, and we're chasing leads on them. Voss was spotted in Dover yesterday, possibly heading for France. Lily's still missing, but we've got men checking Brighton based on a tip. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts darting to Raymond's account. Voss's grey overcoat, Lily's mention of St. Mary Mead. The black glove in the chancel, they were pieces of a puzzle, each edged with human motive. Voss is a man to watch. Inspector, she said, his coat may match those fibres, and his flight suggests guilt or fear. As for Lily Dane or Lillian Harrow, her connection to Lady Beatrice Harrow is no coincidence. A family grudge can be a powerful spur, and her disappearance is telling. But let us return to the vestry door. Have you found anything else in the church? Traces, perhaps, of the figure Tommy saw? Craddock's face lit with a spark of excitement. As a matter of fact, we did. A partial footprint in the mud just outside the vestry door. Small, likely a man's shoe, but too smudged to identify the make. And here's the odd bit of scrap of paper caught in the rose bushes nearby. Blank, except for a smudge of ink, blue, like from a fountain pen. It's with the lab now, but it could be nothing, just litter. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Nothing is nothing, Inspector, until proven so. A footprint, a scrap of paper, they are whispers of presence. And blue ink, it's specific, don't you think? One might ask who in the village uses a fountain pen, or if our stranger favoured one. As for the footprint, it confirms Tommy's story. Someone was there, planning, watching. I think I shall take a look at that vestry door myself, if I may. Craddock chuckled, though his respect was clear. You're welcome to it, Miss Marple. The church is open again, under guard. I'll have a constable escort you, but I warn you, it's a cold trail, literally, with this weather. Miss Marple smiled, rising with a sprightliness that belied her years. Cold trails, Inspector, often lead to warm truths, if one knows where to look. I shan't keep you, but do let me know what the lab finds about that paper. By noon, Miss Marple was at St. Albans, accompanied by a young constable who stood respectfully at a distance. The churchyard was quiet, the EUs casting long shadows in the pale sunlight. She approached the vestry door, a heavy oak panel half hidden by a climbing rose, its thorns catching at her coat. The lock, as Craddock had said, bore faint scratches, barely visible but unmistakable to her keen eye. She studied the ground, noting the patch of mud where the footprint had been found, now smoothed by police boots. The rose bushes, dense and tangled, held no further scraps, but she lingered, picturing the scene, a figure in the dark, moving with purpose, their breath clouding in the chill air. Inside the church, the air was cold and musty, the stained glass windows casting muted colours across the flagstones. Miss Marple walked slowly to the vestry, her footsteps echoing in the vast silence. The room was small, cluttered with hymnals, a desk, and the safe where the vicar kept the keys. She examined the lock again, then the safe, which showed no signs of tampering. Yet the alms box, she recalled, had been loosened a week before, and now the vestry door bore its own marks. Someone had tested the church's defenses, she thought. Someone who knew its rhythms when it was empty, who held the keys. As she left the church, she paused by the chancel where Lane's body had been found. The pew was clean now, the blood scrubbed away, but she could picture him, slumped, the jewels spilling from their pouch. A deliberate scene, she felt, staged to shock, to distract, but from what the vestry door offered a clue an entry, a way to move unseen. She thought of Miss Lyle, the tourist with her questions about locks, and the man in the dark coat, his gloves hiding his hands, and Mrs. Hartnell, caught in the vestry, her excuse thin. The village, as ever, was a mirror, reflecting truths both local and foreign. Back at Danemead Cottage, Miss Marple found a note from Griselda, slipped under the door. It was brief, written in her hasty scrawl. "Jane, I've remembered something. About Miss Lyle. She had a fountain pen, blue ink, dropped it in the vestry and was cross when I picked it up. Thought you'd want to know." Gee, Miss Marple's heart quickened. Blue ink, like the smudge on the scrap by the vestry door. A small thing, but in St. Mary Mead, small things often carried great weight. She updated her list, adding vestry, door, footprint, scrap of paper, Miss Lyle's pen. Beside each, she wrote questions. Who tampered with the lock? Was the footprint the stranger's? Did Miss Lyle know Lane? The pattern was sharpening, its lines drawn by human hands. Greed, fear, cunning. She thought of Raymond's letter, the blue orchid's murky alliances, and Craddock's pursuit of Voss and Lily. The gang, she suspected, was the engine, but its driver was here, in the village, or had been, slipping through the vestry door, to silence a man who knew too much. That afternoon, Miss Marple called on Mrs. Hartnell, whose cottage was a model of parish propriety, all doilies and polished brass. Mrs. Hartnell, a stout woman with a voice like a foghorn, welcomed her with a mix of pride and suspicion. "Miss Marple, what brings you here? Not more about that dreadful business at the church, I hope." Miss Marple smiled, accepting a cup of strong tea. "Only indirectly, Mrs. Hartnell. I've been thinking about the church, and how much you do for it, polishing flowers, such a help to Reverend Dane. Griselda mentioned seeing you in the vestry last week, checking hymnals. I wondered if you'd noticed anything odd, perhaps a visitor, or something out of place." Mrs. Hartnell's cheeks reddened, her eyes darting to the side. "Hymnals, yes, I was. Tidying, nothing odd, no, visitors. Well, there's always someone poking about tourists, you know. I did see a woman, a month back, fair hair, too nosy. For my liking, asked about the vestry, of all things. I sent her packing." Miss Marple's tone remained gentle, though her mind seized on the description. "Fair hair, you say? Like Miss Lyle, perhaps, the tourist Griselda mentioned. It's curious how many people take an interest in our little church." Mrs. Hartnell bristled, her teacup clattering. "Miss Lyle, was it? Might have been. I don't keep track of names, but I'll tell you, Miss Marple, I don't like this talk. I'm a respectable woman, and I won't have it said I'm mixed up in anything untoward." Miss Marple soothed her with a smile, steering the conversation to parish matters until Mrs. Hartnell relaxed. But as she left, she filed away. The woman's unease, her quick deflection, Mrs. Hartnell was hiding something. However small a curiosity too keen, a moment of weakness. Or was she merely embarrassed, caught where she shouldn't have been? Back home, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed, the click of her needles a steady counterpoint to her thoughts. Cherry, bringing in a tray of supper, hovered expectantly. "Any luck, miss? You've been all over today the church. Mrs. Hartnell's found the killer yet?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. "Not yet, Cherry, but the net is tightening. A door, a footprint, a scrap of paper there like breadcrumbs, leading to the truth. And the truth, I think, lies in what people hide. Whether in a Soho club or a village vestry." She thought of the vestry door, its scratched lock a silent witness. Of Miss Lyle, her fountain pen a possible link to the inky scrap. Of Mrs. Hartnell, her furtive glance betraying more than she knew. And of the blue orchid, where Voss and Lily had danced on the edge of Lane's fate. The murder, she felt, was a tapestry of choices, some made in London's shadows, some in St. Mary Mead's light. The vestry door was a hinge swinging between those worlds, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and unerring eye, would follow its arc to the heart of the crime. Chapter 7. The Singer's Secret. The pale sunlight that had graced St. Mary Mead on Wednesday gave way by Thursday to a sullen sky, heavy with clouds that promised more rain. The village, nestled in its gentle hollow, seemed to hunker down, its thatched cottages and winding lanes subdued under the weight of the gathering storm. St. Albans Church, its stone walls glistening with the morning's dew, stood as a quiet monument to the tragedy that had unfolded within. Its doors now open to parishioners, but shadowed by the memory of Victor Lane's death. The village buzzed with a restless energy, its inhabitants trading theories over garden gates and shop counters, each tale more fanciful than the last. Yet beneath the gossip lay a current of unease, as if the murder had exposed a fragility in St. Mary Mead's tranquil heart. Miss Jane Marple sat in her drawing-room at Danemead Cottage, a fire crackling in the grate to ward off the chill. Her knitting lay in a soft heap beside her, a pale scarf taking shape, but her attention was fixed on a new letter from her nephew, Raymond West, delivered that morning. The envelope, slightly crumpled from its journey, bore the smudged postmark of Brighton, and Miss Marple had opened it with a prickle of anticipation. Raymond's foray into the blue orchid had yielded a rich vein of Clusrigi Voss's grey overcoat. Lily Dane's true identity as Lillian Harrow, her mention of St. Mary Medand now, it seemed, had followed the trail to the seaside, where the singer had been found. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, her mild blue eyes sharpening as she unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dear Aunt Jane, I write to you from Brighton, where the sea is as grey as the mood of this case. Your instincts, as ever, were Spatten. Lily Dane, or rather Lillian Harrow, has been found, holed up in a drab boarding-house near the pier. I tracked her down with the help of a contact at Scotland Yard, a favour I'll owe for years, no doubt. And what I've learned is enough to make your knitting needles quiver. But let me start at the beginning, lest I muddle the tale. The boarding-house is a faded affair, all peeling paint and creaking stairs, run by a landlady with a nose for trouble. Lillian was registered under the name Lily Dane, but her fair hair and nervous manner matched the description from the blue orchid. I posed as a cousin, seeking a lost relative, a flimsy story, but it got me through the door. The police had already questioned her, and she was wary, her eyes darting like a trapped bird's. I managed a brief chat before she clammed up, and what she said, combined with the Yard's report, paints a picture that's both murky and intriguing. Lillian admitted knowing Victor Lane, but swore she hadn't seen him since their last meeting at the Blue Orchid, a week before his death. She described him as scared, haunted by a fear he wouldn't name. He kept saying someone was after him, she told the police. Someone high up, someone who didn't forgive mistakes. She claimed ignorance of the jewels, though her hands trembled when the Mayfair theft was mentioned. The police pressed her on St. Mary Mead, and she grew evasive, saying she'd only heard Lane mention it once as a place he'd been 2 years ago. I'm not convinced she knows more, Aunt Jane, but fear's got her tongue. The Yard's report, which my contact shared in confidence, adds a twist. Lillian's past as a tangle of half-truths. She's indeed a cousin of Lady Beatrice Harrow. But the rift was bitter, a scandal involving a stolen brooch, blamed on Lillian at 17. Disowned, she reinvented herself as Lily Dane, singing in clubs to survive. But there's a whisper she never let go of her grudge, and the Mayfair theft, with its personal edge, feels like her handiwork. The police suspect she was involved, perhaps as a planner, using Lane and Voss as her tools. Her flight to Brighton the night before Lane's death suggests she knew trouble was coming. As for Reggie Voss, he's still at large, last seen in Dover, but I've learnt more about him. The Blue Orchid's stagehand, a chatty sort after a pint, described Voss as a bully, always in that grey overcoat with a stiletto he liked to flash. The stiletto's significant, given Lane's wound, and the police are hunting for it. Voss was Lane's contact for fencing the jewels, but they fell out of her money, the stagehand thinks, or a double cross. If Voss is the killer, he's running scared, but I wonder if he's a pawn, like Lane, in a larger game. I'm staying in Brighton another day, hoping to coax more from Lillian or her landlady. The police are watching her, but she's slippery, and I fear she'll bolt again. I've asked my contact to check Lillian's movements before the Murderini trips to St. Mary Mead. Perhaps as your Miss Lyle. I'll write when I have more. In the meantime, Aunt Jane, keep your wits sharp. This case feels like a storm, and I suspect its centre is closer to your village than we think. Yours, ever your intrepid nephew, Raymond. Miss Marple folded the letter, her mind a whirl of connections. Lillian Harrow, with her bitter past and nervous flight, was no mere bystander. Her fear, her evasion, pointed to a deeper role, perhaps the architect of the Mayfair theft, using Lane's connections and Voss's greed. The mention of St. Mary Mead, however vague, tied her to the church, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Miss Lyle, the tourist with the fountain pen and an unhealthy interest in the vestry locks. Could Lillian have visited St. Mary Mead, scouting the church for a plan that culminated in Lane's death? And Voss, with his stiletto and grey coat, was a plausible killer, yet his flight suggested he, too, feared a greater power. She rose, crossing to her writing desk to update her list. New entries appeared. Lillian Harrow, fearful, St. Mary Mead, mention, Voss stiletto, grey coat, Harrow scandal. Beside each, she jotted questions. Did Lillian plan the theft? Was she Miss Lyle? Why did Voss flee? The list was a tapestry of motifs. Greed, fear, and she studied it with the quiet intensity of one who saw not just the threads, but the hands that wove them. The morning's post had also brought a note from Inspector Craddock, confirming the lab's findings on the scrap of paper found by the vestry door. The blue ink matched a common brand, but its smudge held traces of lavender scent, faint but distinct. Miss Marple's heart quickened lavender, a woman's touch, perhaps Lillian's, if she was indeed Miss Lyle. The footprint, Craddock added, remained unidentified, but the glove in the chancel had yielded a hair, dark and coarse, now under analysis. These clues, small but sharp, tightened the net around the case, and Miss Marple resolved to visit the vicarage, where Griselda's keen memory might shed light on the mysterious tourist. The vicarage was a haven of warmth, its drawing room bright, with chintz and the scent of baking. Griselda Dane, her apron dusted with flour, greeted Miss Marple with a mix of relief and curiosity. "Jane, you're a godsend. Clement's at a parish meeting, and I'm drowning in scones. Have one, and tell me what's new with this ghastly murder. The village is positively feverish." Miss Marple accepted a scone, her expression serene, but her eyes alert. "Feverish indeed, my dear. I've been thinking about your Miss Lyle, the tourist who visited last month. You mentioned her fountain pen, blue ink. Did she say anything else about herself? Her manner, perhaps, or where she was staying?" Griselda frowned, setting down her teapot. "Let me think. She was polished, city-bred, with a way of talking that made you feel small. Fair hair, stylish coat green, I think, with a fur collar. She said she was writing a book, but she didn't strike me as a writer. Too calculating. Asked about the vestry, the safe, how often it was checked. I told her it was Reverend Dane's domain, and she lost interest. She mentioned staying at the Red Lion in Much Benham, but I didn't see her again. Why, Jane, do you think she's mixed up in this?" Miss Marple's lips twitched. "I think, Griselda, that people who ask about locks are rarely as innocent as they seem. And blue ink, scented with lavender, it's a detail that lingers. Did she have an accent or any habits that stood out?" Griselda's eyes widened. "Lavender? I didn't notice, but now you mention it, she did smell of something floral. No accent, just crisp English, like a BBC announcer. She fidgeted with her gloves, white kid, very fine. That's all I recall, but I'll ask Clement if he saw her. He's hopeless with faces, but you never know." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the gloves, the green coat, the floral scent. Lillian Harrow, she suspected, had worn many masks, and Miss Lyle was one of them, scouting St. Albans for a purpose that ended in murder. "Thank you, Griselda," she said. "You've been most helpful. I shan't keep you from your scones, but do let me know if anything else comes to mind." As she walked home through the village, the clouds thickening overhead, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the singer's secret. Lillian Harrow's grudge against her cousin, Lady Beatrice, was a motive as old as time in V, sharpened by rejection. The Mayfair theft, with its personal flourish, bore the mark of vengeance, and Lane, as the go-between, had become a liability. But why St. Mary Mead? Why the church? The vestry door, with its scratched lock, suggested a local hand, someone who knew the village's rhythms. Mrs. Hartnell's furtive behaviour nagged at her, as did the stranger in the dark coat, whose black glove and probing questions hinted at a larger plan. Back at Danemead Cottage, Miss Marple found Cherry waiting, with a fresh rumour gleaned from the post office. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Price, says there's talk of a woman seen at the station Monday night. Fair hair, green coat, catching the late train to London. Could it be your Miss Lyle, do you think?" Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained composed. "It could, Cherry, it very well could. A woman leaving the village the night before the murder. It's a piece that fits, though we mustn't jump to conclusions. I think I shall write to Raymond again to ask about Lillian Harrow's appearance. And perhaps a word with Mrs. Price is in order." She sat at her desk, adding to her list. Fair-haired woman at station, green coat, lavender ink. Beside each, she wrote questions. Was Lillian in St. Mary Mead Monday? Did she tamper with the vestry lock? What scared her into flight? The pattern was emerging, its lines drawn by human passions, fear, betrayal. Lillian Harrow, she felt, was the key, her secret the thread that tied the blue orchid to St. Albans that afternoon. Miss Marple visited the post office, where Mrs. Price was eager to share her tale. It was Monday, Miss Marple, just after 8, she said, leaning over the counter. I was locking up when I saw her at the station, fair hair under a smart hat, green coat with fur. She bought a ticket to London, last train, and kept looking over her shoulder, like she expected trouble. I didn't think much of it then, but with this murder, Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. You've a sharp eye, Mrs. Price. Did. She'll speak to anyone, or carry anything. No one, and just a small case, like for an overnight, Mrs. Price said. She was in a hurry, that's certain. Do you think she's the killer, Miss Marple? Miss Marple smiled, deflecting with ease. I think, Mrs. Price, that we must let the police decide. But every detail helps, and you've given me a very useful one. Back home, she wrote to Raymond, asking for a description of Lillian Harrow's appearance and any known habits, her clothing, her scent, her manner. As she sealed the envelope, she felt the case tightening, its edges closing like a net. The singer's secret was unraveling, revealing a woman whose past had driven her to crime, whose fear had sent her fleeing, and whose presence in St. Mary Mead had set the stage for murder. The vestry door, the grey fibres, the black glove, they were signposts, pointing to a truth hidden in the interplay of village and city, sacred and profane. As the rain began to fall, a soft patter against the windows, Miss Marple took up her knitting, the click of her needles a steady rhythm. Cherry, bringing in a tray of supper, paused to watch. You're close, aren't you, miss? I can see it in your face. Got the killer in your sights. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. Close, Cherry, but not there yet. A secret is like a locked door, it needs the right key. Lillian Harrow has one, I think, and when we find it, the rest will follow. She thought of the fair-haired woman at the station, the lavender-scented ink, the scratched lock of the vestry door, of Voss running from a stiletto shadow, and the gang, its leader, still a phantom. The church, she felt, was the heart of it, its sanctity a mirror for human failings. Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and unerring instinct, would turn that mirror, revealing the face of the killer in its reflection. Chapter 8. The grey thread, the November skies over St. Mary Mead had settled into a pattern of brooding clouds, their edges tinged with the threat of rain that never quite fell. By Friday morning, the village wore a muted palette, its lanes slick, with fallen leaves, its cottages huddled against the chill. St. Albans Church, its ancient stones gleaming faintly in the diffuse light, stood as a silent witness to the tragedy that had unfolded within, its doors now open to cautious parishioners, but guarded by the weight of unanswered questions. The murder of Victor Lane, with its cascade of stolen jewels and locked sanctuaries, had woven a web of suspicion that ensnared the village, each new clue tightening its strands. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table in Danemead Cottage, a cup of tea cooling beside her as she reviewed her notes. The fire in the grate cast a warm glow across the room, but her mind was elsewhere, tracing the threads of the case. Lillian Harrow, the singer whose fear and family grudge pointed to a deeper role. Reggie Voss, the fence whose grey overcoat and stiletto made him a prime suspect. The man in the dark coat, whose black glove and probing questions haunted the church. And the vestry door, its scratched lock a silent testament to a plan set in motion. The lavender-scented ink, the fair-haired woman at the station, Mrs. Hartnell's furtive glance, these were pieces of a puzzle that Miss Marple felt was nearing completion, though its final shape eluded her. The Morning Post brought a brief update from Inspector Craddock, delivered by a constable who lingered only long enough to tip his hat. The note confirmed that Reggie Voss had been apprehended in Dover, caught boarding a ferry to Calais. A search of his lodgings had yielded a stiletto, its blade a match for Lane's wound, and a scrap of paper with St. Mary Mead scrawled in hasty ink. Craddock's tone was cautiously triumphant, but he noted a complication. The grey fibres on Lane's coat, while similar to Voss's overcoat, were not a definitive match, suggesting another presence at the scene. The hair from the black glove, dark and coarse, was still under analysis, and the lavender-scented paper remained a mystery, its ink too common to trace. Miss Marple set the note aside, her lips pursing as she considered the implications. Voss was a likely killer, his weapon and flight damning, but the fibres hinted at a second figure, someone close to Lane in his final moments. Someone who had brushed against him in the church. She thought of Lillian Harrow, her green coat and lavender scent, and the stranger in the dark coat, whose gloves might hide more than fingerprints. The village, she knew, held its own secrets, and she resolved to probe further, starting with a visit to the Women's Institute, where gossip flowed as freely as tea. The Institute Hall was a hive of activity, its tables laden with jars of homemade jam and bundles of knitted scarves for the winter bazaar. Miss Marple, her tweed coat buttoned against the chill, slipped in quietly, nodding to familiar faces. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, was holding court by the tea urn, her voice carrying over the chatter. "It's a scandal, that's what it is," she declared. "A murderer in our church, and now they say they've caught him, a London thug, mark my words. But I saw that woman at the station, fair hair, green coat, and I'll wager she's part of it." Miss Marple approached, her smile disarming. "Good morning, Mrs. Price. You've a keen eye for detail, as always. That woman at the station, Monday night, was it? Did you notice anything else about her? A scent, perhaps, or something she carried?" Mrs. Price's eyes gleamed, eager to share. "Monday, yes, just after 8. She was nervy, kept glancing about, like she expected someone to pounce. Had a small case, leather, and a scarf, green to match her coat. I didn't catch a scent, but she was in such a rush, I barely had time to look." "Why, Miss Marple, do you think she's the killer?" Miss Marple chuckled, deflecting with ease. "I think, Mrs. Price, that you've given me something to ponder. A scarf, a case, small things, but they matter. Thank you." As she moved through the hall, Miss Marple gleaned more snippets. A farmer's lad who'd seen a car, dark and sleek, parked near the churchyard Sunday night. A seamstress who'd sold grey wool to half the village, including Mrs. Hartnell, for a winter shawl. A verger's wife who swore she'd heard footsteps in the church after evensong Monday, though she'd found no one. Each detail was a thread, and Miss Marple wove them into her mental tapestry, her instincts sharpening with each new knot dot by noon. She was at the vicarage, where Griselda Dane welcomed her with a tray of slightly overbaked biscuits and a flood of nervous chatter. "Jane, I'm at my wit's end," Griselda said, pouring tea with a trembling hand. "Clemence barely slept, and the village is aflutter with talk of this Voss fellow. They say he's a gangster with a knife. Do you think he's the one? Miss Marple settled into a chintz armchair, her expression serene but her eyes alert. He may be, Griselda, but cases like this are rarely so simple. I've been thinking about the church, and the vestry door, those scratches, so carefully made, and the grey fibres Inspector Craddock found on Mr. Lane's coat. They suggest someone else was there, someone close to him. Have you recalled anything new about your visitors? Miss Lyle, perhaps, or anyone else who seemed out of place? Griselda's brow furrowed, her fingers twisting a napkin. Miss Lyle, yes, I told you about her pen, her lavender scent. I've racked my brain, but there's nothing more. But, well, there was something odd, now I think of it. Mrs. Hartnell, again. She was in the church Tuesday morning, before Clement found the body. I saw her coming out, looking flustered, shawl clutched tight. She said she was checking the altar cloth, but it was early, and she's not usually there before 9. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained composed. Early, you say, and a shawl grey, perhaps? Griselda nodded, her eyes widening. Yes, grey wool, one she's been wearing all winter. Do you think, oh Jane, not Mrs. Hartnell, she's a busybody, but a murderer? Miss Marple's lips twitched. I think nothing yet, my dear, only ask. Mrs. Hartnell is a woman of habit, and habits can hide truths. But let us consider the church itself. The vestry door, the alms box, the glove and the chancel, they suggest a plan. Someone who knew St. Albans well. Have you or Clement noticed anything missing or out of place beyond what the police found? Griselda hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice low. There was one thing, but it's so small, I didn't mention it. The vestry desk, there's a drawer where Clement keeps old sermons, odds and ends. I noticed it was ajar, Tuesday, papers slightly mussed. I thought he'd been careless, but he swears he hadn't touched it in weeks. Could it mean something? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. It could, Griselda, it very well could. A drawer, disturbed, a lock scratched, a glove left behind, small things, but they whisper of intent. Thank you, my dear. I shan't keep you, but do let me know if anything else comes to mind. As she left the vicarage, Miss Marple's thoughts churned. Mrs. Hartnell, in the church, before the body was found, her grey shawl a possible match for the fibres. The vestry drawer, its contents disturbed, suggesting a search for what? A key. A note, a clue to Lane's presence. And the lavender-scented paper, pointing to Lillian Harrow, who might have been Miss Lyle, probing the church's secrets. The stranger in the dark coat, with his black glove, remained a shadow, but his questions about the alms box tied him to the plan. The gang, with its unseen leader, loomed over it all, and Miss Marple felt the case turning. Like a lock yielding to the right key, she decided to visit Mrs. Hartnell, whose cottage was a bastion of parish respectability, its windows framed with starched lace, its garden a model of order. Mrs. Hartnell, stout and imposing, greeted her with a mix of pride and wariness, her eyes narrowing as Miss Marple stepped inside. Miss Marple, this is unexpected. I suppose you're here about that dreadful business at the church. I've told the police all I know, which is precious little. Miss Marple smiled, accepting a seat and a cup of tea that tasted faintly of dust. You're a pillar of St. Albans, Mrs. Hartnell, and pillars see things others miss. Griselda mentioned you were in the church Tuesday morning, early, checking the altar cloth. I wondered if you saw anything unusual, someone lingering, perhaps, or something out of place. Mrs. Hartnell's cheeks reddened, her teacup clattering. In its saucer, early, yes, I was. Tidying, as I do. The altar cloth was crooked, and I won't have slovenliness in God's house. I saw nothing, no one. The church was empty, except for... Well, I thought I heard a noise in the vestry, but it was just the wind, I'm sure. Why do you ask? Miss Marple's tone remained gentle, though her gaze was sharp. A noise, you say? In the vestry. It's curious, with Mr. Lane found. So soon after. And your shawl grey wool, I believe. The police found fibres, you see, on the poor man's coat. Mrs. Hartnell's eyes widened, her voice rising. Fibres? Are you suggesting I had anything to do with it? I'm a respectable woman, Miss Marple, not some criminal. My shawl's grey, yes, but so's half the village's winter wear. I was in the church to serve, not to do whatever you're implying. Miss Marple soothed her with a smile, steering the conversation to parish gossip until Mrs. Hartnell's colour returned. But as she left, she noted the woman's agitation. Her quick denial. Mrs. Hartnell was no murderer, Miss Marple felt, but her presence in the church. Her nervous glance suggested she'd seen or done something she feared to admit. A glance at Lane's body, perhaps, or a moment of curiosity in the vestry. Back at Danemead Cottage, Miss Marple found Cherry waiting with a fresh rumour gleaned from the butcher's. Miss Marple, Tommy says he saw Mrs. Hartnell Tuesday morning, coming out of the church just before the vicar went in. She looked proper rattled, he said, shawl all askew. Do you think she saw the body? Miss Marple nodded, her mind seizing on the detail. It's possible, Cherry, very possible. Mrs. Hartnell is a woman who notices, and notices can be dangerous. I think I shall have a word with Inspector Craddock. The grey thread is leading us somewhere, I'm sure of it. She telephoned the village hall, where Craddock was sifting through reports. His voice was weary but warm. Miss Marple, you've a knack for calling when I need a fresh perspective. Voss is in custody, but he's not talking except to deny everything. The stiletto's a match, but those fibres, they're bothering me. What's on your mind? Miss Marple's tone was measured, her words precise. The fibres, Inspector and Mrs. Hartnell. She was in the church Tuesday morning, early, with a grey shawl that might match. She's nervous, evasive, and Griselda says the vestry drawer was disturbed. I don't think she's the killer, but she may have seen something or someone, and the lavender-scented paper. Have you checked Lillian Harrow's belongings for such a scent? Craddock's interest was palpable, even over the line. Mrs. We'll have another chat with her. As for Lillian, we're searching her Brighton lodgings now. No lavender yet, but we found a green coat and a silk scarf, like the woman at the station. And here's something neuther. Hair from the glove is human, male, but no match to Voss. We're testing it against local samples, but it's slow work. Anything else? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Only this, Inspector. The church is the heart of it. The vestry door, the drawer, the glove, they point to someone who knew St. Albans intimately. Look closely at those who move through it. Daily parishioners, vergers, even visitors like Miss Lyle. The grey thread will lead you to the truth, I think. Craddock chuckled, though his tone was respectful. You're a marvel, Miss Marple. I'll follow your lead, and I'll let you know what we find. If Voss talks, or Lillian slips, we'll have our killer. As she hung up, Miss Marple returned to her desk, adding to her list, Mrs. Hartnell, early visit. Grey shawl, vestry drawer, Voss, stiletto, denial, glove hairmail, not Voss. Beside each, she wrote questions. What did Mrs. Hartnell see? What was sought in the drawer? Who else was in the church? The pattern was sharpening, its lines drawn by human choice's curiosity. Fear, betrayal. That evening, she sat by the fire. Her knitting resumed, the click of her needles a steady counterpoint to her thoughts. Cherry, bringing in a tray of cocoa, paused to watch. You're deep in it, miss. Got the killer yet? Everyone's saying it's that Voss, but you look like you know better. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. Voss is part of it, Cherry, but the grey thread points elsewhere, to someone in the church. Someone who brushed against Mr. Lane, Mrs. Hartnell, Lillian Harrow, the man in the dark coat. They're all pieces, and the church holds them together. The truth, I think, is close. She thought of the vestry door, its lock a silent witness to a plan. Of Mrs. Hartnell, her shawl a possible key to the fibres. Of Lillian, her lavender scent tying her to the paper, and the glove, its hair a clue. To a man yet unnamed. The gang, with its hidden leader, was the engine, but the village was the stage, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and unerring instinct, would lift the curtain on its final act. Chapter 9. The Confession. The Friday evening that enveloped St. Mary Mead carried a restless edge. The clouds parting to reveal a sky pricked with stars, their light cold and distant. The village, bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, seemed to hold its breath. Its lanes quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a fitful breeze. St. Albans Church, its silhouette softened by the night, stood as a solemn guardian, its ancient stones bearing the weight of a crime that had shaken the village to its core. The murder of Victor Lane, with its glittering jewels and breached sanctity, had woven a tapestry of suspicion, and each new revelation tightened its threads, drawing the truth closer to the surface. Miss Jane Marple sat by her fire at Danemead Cottage, a shawl about her shoulders, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm. The room was warm, the crackle of the flames a counterpoint to the quiet. But her mind was far from restful, sifting through the clues that had accumulated, like leaves in an autumn storm. Reggie Voss, apprehended in Dover with a stiletto that matched Lane's wound, was a key figure, yet the grey fibres on Lane's coat pointed to another presence. Lillian Harrow, the singer with a grudge against her cousin, Lady Beatrice, had been in St. Mary Mead, perhaps as Miss Lyle, her lavender-scented ink a link to the scrap by the vestry door. The man in the dark coat, his black glove a silent accusation, remained a shadow, while Mrs. Hartnell's early visit to the church, her grey shawl a possible match for the fibres, hinted at a local secret. The vestry door, the disturbed drawer, the footsteps in the churchyard, they were signposts, and Miss Marple felt the case turning, like a lock yielding to a well-placed key. The day had been one of quiet observation, spent listening to the villagers. Pulse, the butcher's boy recounting Mrs. Hartnell's flustered exit from the church. The verger's wife whispering of a strange hum in the organ loft Monday night. The postmistress speculating about the fair-haired woman at the station. Miss Marple had added these to her list, each a fragment of the truth, but she knew the breakthrough would come not from gossip, but from the human heart, its fears, its guilt, its need to unburden. As she sipped her tea, her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door, urgent and unexpected. Cherry, her maid, ushered in Griselda Dane, whose face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed with distress. "Jane, oh Jane, I'm so sorry to barge in," she said, her voice trembling as she sank onto the sofa. It's Clement. He's in a state, and I don't know what to do. He's hiding something, I'm sure of it, and it's tearing him apart. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her expression kind but her gaze sharp. My dear Griselda, calm yourself and tell me everything. What makes you think Clement is hiding something, and how does it relate to the murder? Griselda twisted her handkerchief, her words spilling out in a rush. It's been since the murder, Jane, but worse today. He's been so strange, jumpy, barely eating, locking himself in his study. This afternoon I found him burning papers in the garden, muttering about mistakes and forgiveness. I begged him to tell me what was wrong, and he broke down, said it was his fault, that he'd let something terrible happen, I think. I think it's about the church, about Mr. Lane. Oh, Jane, what if he's involved? Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her voice remained steady. Clement, involved? I doubt that, my dear, but guilt takes many forms. Let us be clear, did he say what he'd done, or what he believes he caused? Griselda shook her head, tears welling. He wouldn't say more, just kept talking about a letter, something he should never have opened. I'm frightened, Jane. He's a good man, but he's so trusting, and if he's mixed up in this, I can't bear it. Miss Marple rose, patting Griselda's hand. There, my dear. We shall get to the bottom of this, but we must act calmly. I think I must speak to Clement myself, with Inspector Craddock present, if you agree. Guilt, you see, is a heavy burden, and confession often lifts it. Will you fetch him, or shall I come to the vicarage? Griselda wiped her eyes, her resolve firming. I'll bring him here, Jane. He listens to you, and I trust you to sort this out. I'll be back in half an hour. As Griselda hurried out, Miss Marple telephoned the village hall, where Inspector Craddock was working late. His voice, weary but alert, carried a note of surprise. Miss Marple, twice in one day. You've got something, I can tell. What's up? Miss Marple's tone was precise, her words measured. A development, Inspector, at the vicarage. Reverend Dane is distressed, possibly over a secret tied to the murder. His wife is bringing him to my cottage now, and I think you should be. Here, bring your notebook, and perhaps a constable, but let us be gentle. This is a matter of the soul as much as the law. Craddock's interest was palpable. I'll be there in 10 minutes. You're a wonder, Miss Marple. If the vicar's got answers, we'll have them tonight. By the time Craddock arrived, his dark suit slightly rumpled, Miss Marple had prepared the drawing room. A fresh pot of tea on the table, the fire stoked to a comforting blaze. Cherry, sensing the gravity, retreated to the kitchen, leaving the room to its quiet tension. Griselda returned soon after, leading a haggard Clement Dane, whose stooped frame seemed to carry the weight of the world. His eyes, usually mild, were haunted, his hands trembling as he sank into an armchair. Miss Marple poured tea, her movements deliberate, her voice soft. Reverend Dane, you've had a trying time, and we're here to help. Griselda tells me you're troubled, perhaps about something to do with the church. Will you share it with us? The truth, you know, is a bomb, however painful. Clement's gaze darted to Craddock, then to Griselda, who nodded encouragingly. He swallowed, his voice barely above a whisper. I never meant harm, Miss Marple, Inspector. I'm a man of God, but I've been weak, foolish. It's about a letter sent to me a week before Mr. Lane was found. It came in the post, no name, no address, just my name on the envelope. It offered a donation, £1,000 for the church roof, if I would do one thing. Leave the vestry door unlocked one night. Monday it was. It said no one would be hurt, that it was a private matter, a debt being settled. I did it. Griselda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but Miss Marple's expression remained steady, though her heart raced. A letter, she said, and you followed its instructions. Did you keep it, Reverend, or tell anyone? Clement shook his head, his eyes brimming. I burned it the next day. I was ashamed, but I needed the money. The roof's been leaking for years, and the parish is stretched thin. I told no one, not even Griselda. I unlocked the vestry door Monday evening after evensong, and locked it again Tuesday morning before I found him. I thought it was harmless, a rich man's whim. But now I see, I let a killer in. It's my fault, all of it. Craddock leaned forward, his notebook open, his tone firm but kind. Reverend, this is serious, but you've done right to tell us. Can you describe the letter paper, handwriting, anything distinctive? And the donation, did it come? Clement's hands twisted together, his voice faltering. Plain paper, typed, no signature, but there was a scent, faint, like lavender. The donation came Monday, in cash, slipped through the vicarage letterbox, in an envelope. £1,000, as promised. I banked it, thinking it was a blessing. Now it feels like a curse. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, her mind seizing on. The lavender centre match for the scrap by the vestry door, a link to Lillian Harrow. Lavender, she murmured, a small detail, but telling. Reverend, you've been deceived, but not beyond redemption. The letter was a lure to ensure access to the church. Did you see anyone that night, near the vestry, or hear anything unusual? Clement frowned, his memory straining. I checked the door at 9, after locking up. The churchyard was quiet, but I thought I saw a shadow by the EUs, moving quickly. I called out, but no one answered. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind. Oh God, if I'd investigated. Craddock jotted a note, his expression intent. A shadow, likely Tommy's. Figure, it helps, Reverend. You've given us a timeline. The vestry door was the entry, and the letter confirms a plan. We'll need to search the vicarage for any trace of that money source, and I'll have to take a statement. But for now, you've done the right thing. Griselda, tears streaming, took her husband's hand. Clement, why didn't you tell me? We could have faced it together. Clement's voice broke. I was ashamed, Griselda. I thought I was helping the church, but I've profaned it. I'll resign if the bishop thinks it best. Miss Marple's tone was gentle, but firm. Resignation, Reverend, is a choice for later. For now, you've lifted a weight, and that's enough. The church has seen worse sins than yours, and it stands still. Inspector, may I suggest a closer look at that lavender scent? It may lead us to the letter's author. Craddock nodded, closing his notebook. We're on it, Miss Marple. Lillian. Harrow's lodgings turned up a bottle of lavender perfume, and were testing it against the paper. Voss is still silent, but we're pressing him about the gang. This letter, it's a breakthrough. Reverend, you'll need to stay available, but you're not under arrest. Go home, rest. We'll handle it from here. As Griselda led Clement out, his steps heavy but his shoulders lighter, Miss Marple turned to Craddock, her eyes sharp. A typed letter, Inspector, scented with lavender. It's a woman's touch, I think, and Lillian Harrow fits the frame. She was in St. Mary Mead as Miss Lyle, learning the church's ways. The money, the unlocked door, it was her plan to lure Lane to his death. But why, and who wielded the stiletto? Craddock rubbed his jaw, his fatigue evident. Voss is the likely killer, but the fibers suggest another presence. Mrs. Hartnell's shawl is a possibility, but I can't see her in a gang. The gloves, hairmail, not Voss points to someone else. Maybe your man in the dark coat. We're checking local men, but it's slow. Any thoughts? Miss Marple's lips twitched. Many, Inspector, but one stands out. The church was chosen for its meaning. A sanctuary, profaned to silence a man who knew too much. Lillian Harrow wanted Lane dead, perhaps to protect her role in the theft, perhaps to hurt her cousin. The vestry door was her way in, but the grey thread misses. Hartnell, or another suggests, a local hand, someone who saw or helped. Look to the village, Inspector, to those who know St. Albans best. Craddock rose, his smile wry. You're a step ahead, as always. I'll have Mrs. Hartnell in tomorrow, and we're researching the church for that drawer's contents. If Lillian's our mastermind, we'll find the proof. Thank you, Miss Marple, you've turned the tide. As Craddock left, Miss Marple returned to her desk, adding to her list, Clement's letter, lavender, typed, vestry door, unlocked, shadow by use. Beside each, she wrote questions. Who wrote the letter? Was Mrs. Hartnell a witness? Or was it? In the drawer, the pattern was clear now, its lines drawn by human failings, guilt, deception, vengeance. That night, she sat by the fire, her knitting resumed, the click of her needles a steady rhythm. Cherry, bringing in a tray of cocoa, paused to watch. You've done it, haven't you, miss? Got the killer in your sights, with the vicar's confession and all. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. Not quite, Cherry, but the confession has opened a door. Lillian Harrow, I think, is the mind behind it, but the hand that struck, that's still hidden. The grey thread will lead us there, to someone who stood in the church, close to Mr. Lane, in his final moments. She thought of Clement's anguish, the lavender-scented letter, Mrs. Hartnell's shawl, of Lillian, orchestrating from the shadows, and Voss, his stiletto a tool of betrayal. The man in the dark coat, his glove a clue to a presence yet unnamed, lingered in her mind. The church, she felt, was the heart of it, its sanctity a stage for human sin. Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and unerring instinct, would follow the grey thread through the village's lanes and the gang's secrets, to the truth that waited in the shadows of St. Albans. Chapter 10. The Mastermind. The Saturday morning that dawned over St. Mary Mead carried a fragile clarity, the clouds parting to reveal a sky of pale blue, streaked with wisps of white that drifted like forgotten thoughts. The village stirred slowly, its lanes still damp from the week's rains, its cottages aglow with the soft light of early winter. St. Albans Church, its grey stones catching the sun's tentative rays, stood as a quiet monument to the tragedy that had unfolded within. Its doors opened to parishioners, but shadowed by the weight of Victor Lane's death. The murder, with its stolen jewels and breached sanctity, had woven a net of suspicion that now tightened around the village, each clue a knot drawing the truth closer to the light. Miss Jane Marple sat at her writing desk in Danemead Cottage, a cup of tea at her elbow, her notes spread before her like a map of human frailties. The fire in the grate cast a warm flicker across the room, but her mind was sharp, sifting through the threads of the case with the precision of a seamstress. Reverend Dane's confession had been a turning point, revealing a lavender letter that lured him to unlock the vestry door, a calculated move that allowed Lane's killer to enter St. Albans unseen. Lillian Harrow, the singer with a grudge against her cousin, Lady Beatrice Harrow, emerged as a likely architect, her presence in St. Mary Mead as Miss Lyle tying her to the church's probed defences. Reggie Voss, with his stiletto and grey overcoat, was a plausible killer. Yet the grey fibres on Lane's coat hinted at another figure perhaps, Mrs. Hartnell, whose shawl and early visit to the church suggested she'd seen more than she admitted. The man in the dark coat, his black love a silent clue, remained a shadow. His questions about the alms box, a piece of the puzzle yet to fit. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by Cherry, who bustled in with a fresh pot of tea and a gleam of excitement. "Miss Marple, there's news from the village. Mrs. Price says the police are at Mrs. Hartnell's, asking questions about her shawl and what she saw in the church. Everyone's saying she's in it up to her neck, but I can't see her as a killer, can you?" Miss Marple's lips twitched, her eyes sharpening behind her spectacles. Mrs. Hartnell, a killer? Unlikely, Cherry, but she may hold a key, even if she doesn't know it. A shawl, a glance, a moment of curiosity, these can unravel the tightest knots. I think I shall call on Inspector Craddock this morning. The net is closing, and we must be sure of our catch. After breakfast, Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and a sensible hat, her umbrella tucked under her arm as a precaution against the capricious sky. The village hall, where the police had established their base, was a hive of quiet activity, constables sorting reports and murmuring over cups of tea. Inspector Craddock greeted her with a weary smile, his notebook open on the desk before him. "Miss Marple, you're a godsend. This case is like chasing a fox through a briar patch, but your call last night about the vicar's letter has us moving. What brings you now?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her expression mild but her gaze keen. "The grey thread, Inspector, and Mrs. Hartnell. I hear you've been questioning her about her shawl and her early visit to the church. She's a woman of strong opinions, but not, I think, of strong nerves. Has she told you anything new?" Craddock leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "She's a tough nut, I'll give her that. We brought her in this morning, based on Griselda's tip about her being in the church before the body was found. She admits she was there, around 7, checking the altar cloth, but she swears she didn't see Lane or the jewels. Got flustered when we mentioned the grey fibres her shawl's a match for the wall type, though not conclusive. She claims she heard a noise in the vestry, like a drawer closing, but thought it was the verger and left. We're pressing her, but she's sticking to her story." Miss Marple's fingers tapped lightly on her umbrella. "A noise in the vestry, you say? And a drawer, perhaps the one Griselda found ajar. It's curious, Inspector, how these small things align. Mrs. Hartnell is no murderer, but she may have stumbled on something or someone that frightened her into silence. Have you searched the vestry again for what might have been sought in that drawer?" Craddock nodded, flipping a page in his notebook. "We did, this morning. Found nothing new in the drawer, itself just old sermons, a few receipts, a broken pen, but we did find something odd under the desk. A button, small, mother roof pearl, like from a woman's coat. Doesn't match anything in the vicarage, and Mrs. Hartnell says it's not hers. We're testing it for prints, but it's a long shot. Any thoughts?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A button, mother roof pearl. A woman's touch, perhaps, like the lavender-scented letter. "I think, Inspector, We must look closely at Lillian Harrow. Reverend Dane's confession points to her as Miss Lyle orchestrating the church's breach. The button could be hers, from that green coat Mrs. Price saw at the station. Have you had word from Brighton about her lodgings? Craddock's face lit with a spark of excitement. As it happens, yes. We searched her room yesterday, found the green coat, a silk scarf, and a bottle of lavender perfume, as I mentioned. No fountain pen, but a few sheets of plain paper, same type as the scrap by the vestry door. And here's the Kickera train ticket stub, London to St. Mary Mead, dated a month ago when Miss Lyle visited. It's circumstantial, but it's building. We've brought her in for questioning, but she's cagey, denies everything except knowing Lane. Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving connections. Cagey, but cornered. Lillian Harrow is a woman of ambition, Inspector, and ambition breeds daring. I believe she planned the Mayfair theft, not just for profit, but for revenge against her cousin, Lady Beatrice. Lane was her tool, moving the jewels, but he grew reckless, perhaps threatening to expose her, or demanding a larger share. She lured him to St. Mary Mead, to the church, where he could be silenced in a place that would shock and distract. The vestry door, unlocked by poor Clement, was her way in, and the jewels, left beside him, were a taunt, a message to her cousin. Craddock leaned forward, his notebook forgotten. You're saying she's the mastermind, not just a planner, but the one who set it all in motion. It fits, but the stiletto Voss's weapon points to him as the killer. And those grey fibres, the button, they suggest someone else was there, someone local. Miss Marple's lips pursed, her thoughts racing. Voss, I think, was her instrument, hired to do the deed. The stiletto is his, but the fibres suggest a witness or an accomplice who brushed against Lane in the church. Mrs. Hartnell's shawl is one possibility, but her fear speaks of discovery, not guilt. The button, however, points to Lillian, her green coat, perhaps caught in the vestry's clutter. As for the local hand, we must consider how Lillian knew the church's ways. Miss Lyle's visit was no whim. She studied St. Albans, its locks, its habits. But how did she learn them? Someone, I suspect, helped her, knowingly or not. Craddock's eyes narrowed, his interest palpable. A local informant, that's a new angle. The vicar's letter suggests she had inside knowledge, but Clement swears he told no one. Mrs. Hartnell's nosy, but I can't see her in a gang. Who else then? The verger, a parishioner. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the fire, her mind turning. Not the verger, I think he's too timid. But the church is a crossroads, Inspector, where many pass. Parishioners, visitors, even tradesmen. Lillian, as Miss Lyle, was seen by Griselda, Mrs. Hartnell, perhaps others. She asked questions, left impressions. Someone may have spoken carelessly, or been drawn in by her charm. I recall Mrs. Price mentioning a car near the churchyard Sunday night, dark and sleek. It's a small thing, but it suggests planning, a reconnaissance. We must ask who saw that car, and who might have spoken to its driver. Craddock jotted a note, his expression thoughtful. A car, eh? We'll check with the locals, farmers, delivery boys, anyone out late, and I'll have another go at Lillian, see if we can shake her story. Voss is still clamming up, but we found a note in his pocket, cryptic Mead, Monday, midnight, could be St. Mary Mead, a meeting time. If he was there, with Lillian, we're close to cracking it. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts darting to the man in the dark coat, his black glove, His questions about the alms box suggested a role beyond Voss's brute force. Could he be the gang's leader, or another pawn in Lillian's game? The hair in the glove, male and not Voss's, was a loose end, pointing to a presence yet unnamed. "The man in the dark coat," she said. "Have you traced him, Inspector? His glove, his interest in the church, they place him at the scene or near it." Craddock sighed, flipping through his notebook. "No luck yet. The glove's hair is our best lead, but it's not in our local database. We're testing it against known associates of the gang, but it's slow. The Blue Boar's landlord, Giles, gave us a sketch of the mantle, lean, dark hat, no clear features. He's a ghost, but ghosts leave traces. We're checking other inns, stations, anywhere he might have passed through." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Ghosts, indeed. But they walk among us, Inspector. The man in the dark coat was no tourist, but a planner, like Lillian. His questions about the alms box suggest he sought a hiding place or a signal. The glove, left in the chancel, was careless or deliberate, a challenge to us. I think he was. Lillian's ally, perhaps her confidant, until the plan turned deadly." Craddock's eyes widened, a spark of realization kindling. "You're thinking of falling out, Lillian, Voss, and this man working together. Then one betrays the others. It's possible Lane was the weak link, and killing him in the church could have been a warning to the rest. But why leave the jewels? Why not take them and run?" Miss Marple's gaze softened, though her mind was razor sharp. The jewels, Inspector, were Lillian's signature. She stole them not just for wealth, but to wound her cousin, to prove her cunning. Leaving them with Lane was her flourish. A way to say, "I've won, and you'll never touch me." But she miscalculated Voss's flight. The fibers, the button, they're her undoing. She planned a perfect crime, but human nature is never perfect. Craddock closed his notebook, his smile wry. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple. I'll get on Lillian's case, and we'll dig into that car sighting. Mrs. Hartnell's coming in again tomorrow. She's hiding something, I'm sure of it. If we can tie her shawl to the fibers, or find what was in that drawer, we'll have our proof. Anything else before I go?" Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. "Only this. Inspector, the church is the heart of it, but the village is its pulse. Look to those who know St. Albans, there's Mrs. Hartnell, the verger, even the children who play in the churchyard. Someone saw something, however small, that will lead us to Lillian's local link, and the lavender scent tested against her. Perfume, but also ask if Mrs. Hartnell noticed it in the church. Small things, Inspector, make the greatest difference." Craddock took his leave, promising to update her by evening. As the door closed, Miss Marple returned to her desk, adding, "To her list, mother of pearl button, car near churchyard, Voss's Notemead, midnight." Beside each, she wrote questions. Was the button Lillian's? Who drove the car? Did the man in the dark coat meet Lane? The pattern was nearly complete, its lines drawn by human passions, vengeance, greed, fear. That afternoon, she decided to walk to the churchyard, her curiosity drawn to the vestry door and the rose bushes where the lavender-scented scrap had been found. The air was sharp, the sunlight fading as clouds gathered once more. The churchyard was quiet, save for a blackbird's trill, and Miss Marple moved slowly, her eyes scanning the path. The vestry door, its oak weathered but solid, bore the faint scratches Craddock had noted, a testament to a careful hand. The rose bushes, tangled and thorny, held no new secrets, but she lingered, picturing the scene, a figure in the dark, slipping through the unlocked door, their breath clouding in the chill air. As she turned to leave, she spotted Tommy, the butcher's boy, kicking a stone along the path. He grinned at her, his cap askew. "Afternoon, Miss Marple. You looking for clues, like the police?" "I told Em about that figure Monday night, by the vestry." Miss Marple smiled, her tone gentle. "You did well, Tommy. A sharp eye is a great gift. Tell me, did you see anything else that night, or perhaps Sunday?" Mrs. Price mentioned a car near the churchyard, dark and sleek. "Did you notice it?" Tommy's brow furrowed, his memory straining. "Sunday, I did see a car, now you say it. Black, shiny, parked by the lane, near the EUs. Thought it was someone lost, but it was gone when I came back. Didn't see who was in it, but it was odd, sitting there with no lights." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained composed. "Odd, indeed. Thank you, Tommy. You've been most helpful. Mind you don't tell everyone, they'll let the police hear it first." Tommy nodded, scampering off, and Miss Marple made her way home, her thoughts a whirl of connections. The car, like the man in the dark coat, was a sign of planning, a link to Lillian's urban world. Had she driven it, or sent an ally to scout the church? The button, the lavender, the vestry door, they pointed to her. But the grey fibres, the glove's hair, suggested a local presence, someone who moved unnoticed in St. Mary Mead's quiet. Rhythms back at Danemead Cottage, she found a note from Craddock, slipped under the door. Lillian Harrow had cracked under questioning, admitting she'd visited St. Mary Mead as Miss Lyle, but denying the murder or the letter. She claimed Lane had chosen the church himself for a meeting with Voss, and that she'd fled to Brighton out of fear of the gang's leader, whom she refused to name. Craddock was sceptical, pressing for more, and had sent Mrs. Hartnell's shawl for testing. The button, he added, bore a trace of green thread. Matching Lillian's coat, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed. The click of her needles, a steady counterpoint to her thoughts. Cherry, bringing in a tray of supper, paused to watch. "You're close, aren't you, miss? The police are all over Mrs. Hartnell and that singer. Got the killer yet?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. "Close, Cherry, very close. Lillian Harrow is the mind behind it, I'm certain, but the hand that struck is still hidden. The grey thread, the button, the car there leading us to her, and to someone in the village who helped, perhaps without knowing. The church holds the truth, and we shall find it." She thought of Lillian, her lavender perfume a signature of deceit, of Mrs. Hartnell, her shawl a possible key to the fibres, of the man in the dark coat, his glove a clue to a man yet unnamed, and the car a fleeting sign of conspiracy. The gang's leader, still a phantom, hovered over it all, but Lillian was the mastermind, her vengeance a flame that had consumed Lane. The vestry door, unlocked by a trusting vicar, was her gateway, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, an unerring instinct, would follow its path to the heart of the crime. Chapter 11. The trap. The Sunday morning that broke over St. Mary Mead was one of deceptive calm. The sky a delicate wash of blue, its edges softened by wisps of cloud that drifted lazily above the village. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of late roses, and the lanes were quiet, save for the soft tolling of St. Alban's bell calling parishioners to morning service. The church, its grey stones aglow in the gentle light, stood as a beacon of continuity, yet its sanctity remained shadowed by the murder of Victor Lane. a crime that had woven a net of suspicion through the village's heart. The case, with its stolen jewels, breached locks, and hidden motives, was nearing its climax, and Miss Jane Marple, with her quiet patience, felt the threads of truth drawing tight at Danemead Cottage. Miss Marple sat by her window, a shawl about her shoulders, her knitting idle as she reviewed her notes. The fire in the grate cast a warm glow, but her mind was sharp, tracing the case's intricate paths. Reverend Dane's confession had exposed a lavender-scented letter that lured him to unlock the vestry door, a calculated move by Lillian Harrow, the singer whose grudge against her cousin, Lady Beatrice Harrow, had fueled the Mayfair theft. Reggie Voss, with his stiletto and grey overcoat, was the likely killer, though the grey fibres on Lane's coat suggested another presence perhaps. Mrs. Hartnell, whose shawl and early visit to the church hinted at an unwitting role. The man in the dark coat, his black glove a lingering clue, remained elusive, while the mother-youth pearl button tied to Lillian's green coat and the dark car near the churchyard pointed to a conspiracy rooted in both village and city. Lillian, Miss Marple was certain, was the mastermind, her vengeance a flame that had consumed Lane. But the final proof lay just beyond reach. The Morning Post brought a letter from her nephew, Raymond West, written in his usual florid style, but brimming with urgency. Miss Marple sliced the envelope with a letter opener, her eyes sharpening as she read, "My dear Aunt Jane, Brighton's sea air has done little to clear the fog of this case. But I've struck gold, or rather, a clue that may tip the scales. Lillian Harrow, under police watch, has been a closed book, but I've gleaned more from her landlady, a gossipy soul with a memory like a steel trap. She swears Lillian received a visitor 2 days before her flight to Britain. Man, tall, lean, in a dark coat and hat, gloves on despite the warmth. He stayed only minutes, but the landlady overheard a snatch of talk, Mead's set but Lane's. Trouble, she didn't catch more, but the man left a note, which Lillian burned in the sink. The landlady noticed a whiff of lavender from its sound familiar. I pressed my yard contact, and they've confirmed the man matches the blue boars. J. Smith. No name yet, but they're scouring Soho for him. Lillian's cracking, they say her denials are weaker, and she's hinted at a partner she fears, someone who pulls the strings. The police think it's the gang's leader, but I wonder if it's your man in the dark coat tied to that glove. I've also learned Lillian owned a green coat with mother-of pearl buttons one's missing, per the landlady, lost somewhere up-country, St. Mary Mead, perhaps. I'm back in London tonight, chasing a lead on Voss's associates. The police have him talking, but he's cagey, blaming Lillian for the job while swearing he only followed orders. I'll write again tomorrow. Aunt Jane, you're close. I can feel it. This case is a beast, but your quiet pause will tame it. Yours, ever your sleuthing scribe. Raymond. Miss Marple folded the letter, her mind alight with connections. The man in the dark coat, visiting Lillian, speaking of St. Mary Mead, his role was clearer now. A partner or enforcer in her plan, perhaps the gang's leader himself. The lavender-scented note, the missing button, Lillian's fear, they pointed to a conspiracy unraveling under pressure. Voss's confession, however partial, confirmed Lillian's hand, but the grey fibres, Mrs. Hartnell's shawl, and the glove's dark hair suggested a local link, someone who had stood close to Lane. In his final moments, the trap, Miss Marple felt, was ready to spring, but it needed bait to lure the mastermind into the open. She telephoned Inspector Craddock at the village hall, her voice calm but insistent. "Inspector, I've had word from my nephew about Lillian. Harrower visitor, matching our man in the dark coat, and a missing button from her green coat. I believe she's our architect, but she's cautious, protected by fear of a higher power. We need to draw her out, here, to St. Mary Mead. A rumour, perhaps, of new evidence in the church, something only she would know to fear. Will you help? Me set the trap." Craddock's tone was wary but intrigued. "A trap, Miss Marple. It's risky, but you've not steered us wrong yet. What's your plan?" Miss Marple's words were precise, her mind a step ahead. "Spread word, discreetly, that a hidden note was found in the vestry drawer, naming the planner of Lane's murder. Let it reach Brighton through your contacts or the village grapevine. Lillian will hear she's watching, I'm sure. She'll come to retrieve or destroy it, and we'll be waiting. The church is her stage, Inspector, and she can't resist its call." Craddock hesitated, then relented. "I'll do it, but we'll need men in place, plainclothes, to keep it tight. I'm bringing Lillian in again today's. She's wavering, but not broken. Voss gave us more last night. He says Lillian paid him to kill Lane, but someone else was in the church, a man he didn't know, watching from the shadows. Could be your dark-coated fellow. Anything else?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Only this, Inspector. Check Mrs. Hartnell's story again. Her shawl may match the fibres, but her fear suggests she saw something, a man, perhaps, or Lillian herself. And the gloves, hair-tested against the verger, Mr. Jessup, anyone who's been in the chancel. The local thread is key, and we mustn't miss it." Craddock chuckled, his respect clear. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple. I'll set the rumour going and have men at the church by evening. Mrs. Hartnell's due in an hour, and we're testing her shawl now. If Lillian takes the bait, we'll have her. I'll call you with updates." As she hung up, Miss Marple felt a quiet thrill, the case's climax within reach. She updated her list, adding, "Man in dark coat, Lillian's visitor, missing button. Voss's claim second man, rumour trap." Beside each, she wrote questions. Was the man the gang's leader? Did Mrs. Hartnell see him? Who was in the shadows? The pattern was nearly complete, its lines drawn by human passions, fear, betrayal. By noon, she was at the Women's Institute, where the bazaar's preparations provided cover for her inquiries. Mrs. Price, ever the hub of gossip, was quick to share. "Miss Marple, they're saying the police found something in the Churcher note, hidden in the vestry, naming the killer. It's all over the village, though Inspector Craddock's keeping mum. Do you think it's true?" Miss Marple smiled, her expression benign. "Rumours, Mrs. Price, are like seeds, they grow where they're planted. But you've a sharp eye. Tell me, did you ever notice Mrs. Hartnell wearing a lavender scent, or perhaps see her with a stranger before the murder?" Mrs. Price's brow furrowed, her memory straining. "Lavender, no, she's all camphor and soap, that one. But a stranger. Now you mention it, I saw her talking to a man a week before the murder, outside the church. Tall, dark coat, hat low. She looked cross, like she was scolding him. I thought he was a beggar, but he walked off sharpish. Could it mean something?" Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained composed. "It could, Mrs. Price. It very well could. Thank you, you've been most helpful." As she left the hall, Miss Marple's thoughts churned. Mrs. Hartnell, confronting the man in the dark coat, had she caught him probing the church, or mistaken him for someone else? Her shawl, her early... Visit her fear, they painted her as a witness, not a culprit, but her silence was a barrier. The rumour, she hoped, would flush out Lillian, but the villagers' secrets were equally vital, and Mrs. Hartnell held one, whether she knew it or not. That afternoon, she visited the churchyard, her curiosity drawn to the vestry door, where the trap would be set. The roses, still clinging to their thorns, swayed in the breeze, and the scratched lock gleamed faintly in the light. She pictured Lillian slipping through that door as Miss Lyle, her green coat catching on a splinter, a button falling unnoticed. The verger, Mr. Jessup, was sweeping the path, and Miss Marple paused to chat, her tone casual. "Good day, Mr. Jessup. A trying week with all this trouble. Tell me, did you ever see a woman, fair-haired, in a green coat, asking about the church? Or perhaps a man, tall, in a dark coat?" Jessup leaned on his broom, his weathered face thoughtful. "A woman, no, but a man, aye. Week before the murder, he was by the alms box, looking at it queer-like. Dark coat, gloves, hat low. I asked if he needed help, and he said he was studying the carvings. Didn't believe him, but he left quick. Never saw him again, but with that body found, makes you wonder." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the detail. "It does, Mr. Jessup. You've a good memory. If you recall anything else, do tell the police or me." Back at Danemead Cottage, she found a note from Craddock, delivered by a constable. The rumour had spread, reaching Brighton through a planted tip to a local reporter. Lillian Harrow was restless, asking to leave her boarding house, but was under watch. Mrs. Hartnell, questioned again, had admitted seeing a man in the chancel Monday night, tall and shadowed, but swore she'd fled in fear, telling no one. Her shawl was still being tested, but the button's green thread was a near match to Lillian's coat. Craddock was positioning men at St. Albans for dusk, expecting Lillian to take the bait. Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed, the click of her needles a steady rhythm. The trap was set, but she felt a twinge of unease. Lillian was cunning, and her partner, the man in the dark coat, was a wirecard. She wrote to Raymond, asking for any further details on the man's appearance or associates, and added to her list Mrs. Hartnell sighting, man in chancel, verger's encounter, trap set. Beside each, she wrote questions. Was the man Lillian's partner? Did Mrs. Hartnell recognize him? Would Lillian come alone? By evening, the village was abuzz with the rumour, its whispers reaching the Blue Boar, where Mr. Giles reported a stranger asking about the church, fair-haired, in a dark scarf, possibly Lillian in disguise. Craddock telephoned at 7, his voice tense. "Miss Marple, it's happening." A woman matching Lillian's description was seen at the station, heading toward the church. "We've got men in the churchyard, vestry, and chancel, all plainclothes. I'm heading there now. Care to join us from a safe distance?" Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her voice was calm. "I shall, Inspector, but only to observe. I'll be at the Lichgate by 8. Be careful, Lillian is desperate, and desperate people are dangerous." She donned her coat and shawl, her umbrella a prop for her role as an innocent bystander. The churchyard was cloaked in twilight, the EUs casting long shadows as she reached the Craddock's men, disguised as groundskeepers and parishioners, moved with quiet purpose, their eyes scanning the paths. Miss Marple stood by the gate, her silhouette unthreatening, her gaze sharp. At 8:15, a figure appeared, moving swiftly. Along the line a woman, fair-haired in a dark coat and scarf, her face half hidden. She paused at the churchyard's edge, glancing about, then slipped toward the vestry door, her movements practiced. Miss Marple's breath caught Lillian Harrow, drawn by the rumour, unable to resist the threat of exposure. The door creaked. As she tested it, finding it unlocked, a lure set by Craddock's men. As Lillian entered, a rustle in the EUs betrayed a second figure tall. Lean, in a dark coat, hat low, Miss Marple's heart raced the man in the dark coat, following Lillian, perhaps to silence her. She signalled to a nearby constable, who nodded and relayed the alert. Inside the church, a muffled cry echoed, followed by the sound of footsteps. Craddock's men closed in, their voices sharp as they called for surrender. Lillian emerged from the vestry, her scarf askew, her face pale with fury. "There's nothing here," she spat as Craddock's men seized her. "You've tricked me, but you'll get nothing." The man in the dark coat, caught in the churchyard, struggled briefly before being subdued, his hat falling to reveal a lean face, unfamiliar but hard-edged. Craddock approached Miss Marple, his expression triumphant. "We've got them, Miss Marple Lillian and her partner, one Harry Kent, known to the yard as a gang enforcer. She came for the note, as you predicted, and he followed, likely to keep her quiet. Voss's confession seals Itty named Lillian as the planner, Kent as the watcher. We'll have them both talking by morning." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on Lillian, whose defiance was crumbling. "Well done, Inspector." Lillian wove a clever web, but it's tangled her now. The grey fibres, though Mrs. Hartnell's shawl or another. Craddock grinned. "We're testing it, but Mrs. Hartnell's Claire Chi saw Kent in the chancel, panicked, and ran. Her shawl brushed Lane's coat as she passed, the buttons Lillian's lost in the vestry. "It's over, Miss Marple, thanks to you." Back. At Danemead Cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed, the click of her needles a soothing rhythm. Cherry, bringing in cocoa, paused to watch. "You did it, miss. Caught the killer, or killers, I should say. The village is buzzing." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. "Not I, Cherry, but the truth. Lillian Harrow set the trap for Lane, but her own pride sprung it on her. The church revealed her, as it always does those who profane it." She thought of Lillian's defiance, Kent's cold eyes, Mrs. Hartnell's fear. The grey thread, the button, the lavender they had led to the mastermind, whose vengeance had burned too bright. St. Albans, with its quiet sanctity, had held the truth, and Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct, had drawn it into the light. Chapter 12. The Sanctuary Restored. The Sunday evening that settled over St. Mary Mead was one of profound stillness. The pale blue sky of morning deepening to a velvet indigo, pricked with stars that gleamed like scattered diamonds. The village, nestled in its gentle hollow, seemed to exhale, its lanes quiet save for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant bark of a dog. St. Albans Church, its ancient stones, silvered by moonlight, stood as a beacon of endurance, its sanctity reaffirmed. After the turmoil of Victor Lane's murder, the case, with its intricate web of stolen jewels, breached locks, and hidden motives, had reached its resolution, and the village, though forever changed, began to weave its peace anew. Miss Jane Marple sat by her fire at Danemead Cottage, a shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, soothing rhythm. The room was warm, the glow of the flames dancing across the chintz curtains and the polished surfaces of her modest furniture. Yet her mind lingered on the events of the past week, sifting through the threads that had led to the capture of Lillian. Harrow and her accomplice, Harry Kent, the trap, set with a rumour of a hidden note in the vestry, had sprung flawlessly, drawing Lillian back to St. Mary Mead, where her desperation had betrayed her. Kent, the man in the dark coat, had followed, his presence a final piece in the puzzle that Miss Marple had patiently assembled. The grey fibres, the mother-of-pearl button, the lavender-scented letter, they were the breadcrumbs that had led to the mastermind, whose vengeance had ignited a tragedy in the heart of the village. The morning had been one of quiet triumph, with Inspector Dermot Craddock visiting to share the final details of the case. He had arrived at 10, his dark suit pressed but his eyes shadowed with the fatigue of a long week, and Miss Marple had welcomed him with tea and a plate of cherries shortbread still warm from the oven. "Miss Marple, you've outdone yourself," he said, settling into an armchair with a grateful sigh. "Lillian, Harrow, and Harry Kent are in custody, and we've got enough to put them away for good. I owe you a debt. Your trap was the key, and your instincts, well, they're sharper than any detective's I know." Miss Marple poured tea, her expression mild but her gaze keen. "Nonsense, Inspector. I only saw what was there, as anyone might, with a bit of patience. Tell me, what have Lillian and Kent revealed? And the grey fibres, have they found their place in the story?" Craddock opened his notebook, its pages crowded with neat script, and recounted the interrogations. Lillian Harrow, faced with confession and the evidence of her green coat's button, had crumbled, her defiance giving way to a bitter admission. She planned it all, Craddock said. The Mayfair theft was her revenge against Lady Beatrice Harrow, who'd cast her out after that brooch scandal years ago. Lillian used her charm to recruit Lane, a weak link who moved the jewels through his antiquities trade. Voss was the muscle paid to fence the goods. But when Lane grew reckless, stalking too much, demanding more, she decided he had to go. St. Mary Mead was her choice, a place she'd visited as Miss Lyle, where the church's sanctity would amplify the shock, a final jab at her cousin's world. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly. "And the letter to Reverend Dane, her hand, I presume, with its lavender scent." "Spot on," Craddock said. "She typed it in London, sprayed it with her perfumer habit," she said, "not a clue. She'd learned the church's habits from her visit, posing as a tourist, and knew Clement's need for funds would make him pliable. The vestry door was her way in, unlocked by his trust. She paid Voss to kill Lane, but Kent was there, watching to ensure it went smoothly. He's the gang's enforcer, not the leader. We're still hunting that shadow, but he was her partner in this. The jewels, left with Lane, were her signature, a taunt to Beatrice that she'd won, even if the goods were lost." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her thoughts turning to the church. A taunt, yes, but a miscalculation. The jewels drew our eyes, but the fibres, the button, they told the truth. And Mrs. Hartnell, her shawl, her sighting of Kentwat, was her role. Flipped a page, his expression rueful. Mrs. Hartnell's cleared, but she's a lesson in keeping quiet when you shouldn't. Her shawl matched the grey fibres she brushed against Lane's coat as she fled the church Tuesday morning. Having seen Kent in the chancel, she'd gone early, as she told us, to tidy the altar cloth, but heard a noise in the vestry drawer closing, likely Kent searching for anything Lane might have left. She spotted him, tall and shadowed, and panicked, thinking he was a thief or worse. She didn't see Lane's body, but her fear kept her silent, afraid she'd be blamed or targeted. "We've had a stern word, but she's more shaken than guilty." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, the pieces falling into place. "Fear, Inspector, is a powerful silencer, and the glove's hair, The verger, perhaps, or another. Craddock shook his head. Not the verger, Mr. Jessop's hair's grey, not dark. It's Kent's, we confirmed this morning. He dropped the glove in the chancel, careless in his haste to leave after Voss's strike. The OMC box questions were a feint he was checking. The church's security, ensuring no one would interrupt the murder. The car Tommy saw Sunday night was his, scouting the ground. It's all tied up, Miss Marple, except for the gang's leader. Lillian swears she never met them, only followed orders through Kent. We'll get there, but for now, Lane's killer is done. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind lingering on the church. The sanctuary, Inspector, was the heart of it. Lillian chose it not just for shock, but for its power, a place where sins are laid bare. She thought it would hide her, but it revealed her instead. And Lady Beatrice, has she been told? Craddock nodded, his tone softening. She's in London. Shaken but relieved. The jewels are back with her, and she's donated a tidy sum to St. Albans Roof Fund, out of gratitude or guilt, perhaps, for Lillian's fall. She's asked to meet you, by the way, says she owes you a debt for uncovering the truth. Miss Marple chuckled, deflecting with ease. An old lady's curiosity, nothing more. But I'm glad for the church, deserves to stand strong after such a trial. And Reverend Dane, how is he faring? Craddock's smile was wry, chastened, but holding on. The bishop's been kind, considering his confession. He'll stay, with Griselda's support, and the village seems to forgive him. Trust, as you'd say, is a fragile thing, but it mends. As Craddock took his leave, promising to update her. On the gang's leader, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction, the case's loose ends tied, save for the phantom at its head. She returned to her desk, her list now a record of resolution. Lillian Harrow, mastermind; Harry Kent, enforcer; Voss killer; Mrs. Hartnell, witness; lavender letter; grey fibres; mother of pearl; button. Beside each, she noted the answers. The human motives, vengeance, greed, fear that had driven them. The church, she thought, had been a mirror, reflecting the sins of those who entered. And she had read its reflections with the clarity of one who understood the heart's quiet pulses that afternoon. She walked to St. Albans, her tweed coat buttoned against the chill, her umbrella a companion despite the clear sky. The churchyard was peaceful, the EUs whispering in the breeze, the roses by the vestry door shedding their final petals. Inside, the church was hushed, its stained glass windows casting muted colours across the flagstones, the air heavy with the scent of wax and old wood. Reverend Dane was at the altar, arranging candles, his movements slow but steady. He turned. At her approach, his face etched with gratitude and lingering shame. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice soft, "I owe you more than I can say. You've saved me and the church from a darkness I brought upon us." Miss Marple's smile was kind, her eyes gentle. "You saved yourself, Reverend, by speaking the truth. The church is stronger for it, and so are you. Let it be a sanctuary again for all who seek it." Dane nodded, his eyes misting. "I will, with God's help. The roof fund. Lady Beatrice's gift will see it mended. It feels like a new beginning, though I'll never forget my failing." Miss Marple touched his arm, her voice firm. "Failings, Reverend, are human. It's what we do after that matters. St. Albans has seen centuries of sin and redemption. It will see more, and stand through them all." As she left the church, she paused by the chancel, where Lane's body had been found. The pew now clean, its oak polished to a soft sheen. She pictured him slumped, the jewels spilling from their pouch, a man caught in a web of his own making. Lillian's vengeance, Kent's vigilance, Vorse's blade, they had converged here, in a place meant for solace, turning it into a stage for betrayal. Yet the church had endured its sanctity, a quiet rebuke to those who sought to profane it. Back at Danemead Cottage, Miss Marple found Cherry waiting with a fresh pot of tea and a gleam of curiosity. "Miss Marple, the village is singing your praises. They say you caught that singer and her gang like a proper detective. What's it feel like, solving a murder?" Miss Marple chuckled, settling by the fire with her knitting. "It feels, Cherry, like tidying a very messy room. People, you see, leave traces, words, glances, buttons, and those traces tell a story. Mr. Lane sought sanctuary, but found only his past. The church showed us the truth, as it always does." Cherry perched on a chair, her eyes wide. "The church, miss. You make it sound alive, like it helped you catch them." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her needles clicking steadily. "Alive, perhaps, in its way. A church is a mirror of the soul, Cherry, reflecting what we hide, guilt or grace. Lillian Harrow thought she could use it, but it turned her secrets against her. The jewels, the letter, the glove, they were her own confessions, written in the shadows of St. Albans." Cherry shivered, though the room was warm. "You give me goosebumps, miss. What about that gang leader? They say he's still out there, pulling strings." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window, where the village lay under a starlit sky. "He is, Cherry, for now, but shadows cannot hide forever. Inspector Craddock will find him, or another. Case will bring him to light. Evil, you see, is patient, but so is justice." As Cherry bustled off to the kitchen, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the scarf lengthening with each quiet stitch. She thought of Lillian Harrow, her defiance broken by the weight of her own plan, of Harry Kent, his cold eyes betraying a man who lived by others' secrets, of Reggie Voss, whose stiletto had ended Lane's life, and Mrs. Hartnell, whose fear had nearly cost her the truth. The village, with its gentle rhythms, had been a stage for their drama, but it was St. Albans, with its ancient wisdom, that had spoken loudest, revealing the heart of the crime. The next morning, she received a letter from Lady Beatrice Harrow, written in a firm, elegant hand, expressing gratitude and inviting her to London for tea. Miss Marple smiled, penning a polite reply, declining the visit but wishing her peace. The jewels, she knew, were a small price for the lesson Beatrice had learned that family, however estranged, could wound deeper than any thief. The donation to St. Albans was her atonement, and Miss Marple was content to let it stand by. Monday, the village had settled into its routine, the gossip softening to murmurs of relief. Griselda, Dane called, her voice bright with hope, to say Clement was preparing a sermon on forgiveness, his first since the confession. Mrs. Price, at the post office, reported a new tourist, asking about the church's history, but this one seemed genuine, with a notebook and no hidden glances. Tommy, the butcher's boy, waved as he pedalled past, his grin a sign that the churchyard held no more shadows for him. Miss Marple walked to the Blue Boar, in where Mr. Giles poured her a cup of tea and shared a tidbit a man had asked about the church last night, but left when told the murder was solved, his face unreadable. Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the detailer loose end, perhaps, or a curious traveller. The gang's leader, she suspected, would surface in time, drawn by another crime, another misstep. That evening, she sat by her fire, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the crackle of the flames. Cherry, bringing in a tray of cocoa, paused too. "Watch. You're content, aren't you, miss? The village is quiet again, thanks to you. Planning another case already." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her voice gentle but firm. "Content, Cherry, but never idle. The village is quiet, yes, but human nature never is. St. Mary Mead, like St. Albans, holds its secrets, and I shall be here, listening, when they speak." She thought of the church, its pews now filled with worshippers, its roof soon to be mended by Beatrice's gift, of Lane, whose greed had led him to a false sanctuary, and Lillian, whose vengeance had burned her own path to ruin. The grey fibres, the lavender letter, the mother-of pearl button, they were the church's whispers, guiding her to the truth. The sanctuary, profaned by human sin, had been restored, its mirror polished to reflect grace once more. As the stars gleamed over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple's needles clicked on, stitching not just a scarf, but the quiet certainty that justice, like faith, endured. The village slept, its heart beating softly under the watchful gaze of St. Albans, and Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct, kept vigil, ready for the next secret to stir in its shadows.